Yo, Atlas speaking, and welcome to part 5 of What If I Was Reincarnated into the Naruto World with the Skyrim System. Let the tale begin. Chapter 116, Return. The teams, along with the Hokage and Karin, returned to Konoha. The atmosphere weighed heavily with the aftermath of the battle. As they all filed into Tsunade's room, the solemnity of the situation was punctuated by the crisp clacking of the Hokage's sandals against the wooden floor. The room was large, but the crowd made it seem smaller. Tsunade sat at the head of the room, a stern expression on her face. Next to her were her students, Karin and Sakura. Jiraiya, the Toad Sannin, was standing off to the side, his arms crossed and a grave look in his eyes. The Jounin sensei of the 5 teams were there, and Team 7, Koushin, Naruto, and Hinata, were seated in the corner. Ino was nestled in Koushin's arms, the usually playful man silent and pensive as he held her close. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes after a brutal battle and an uneasy victory. Shikaku, the Nara clan head, was also in the room. His keen insight and strategic mind were invaluable in discussing the day's events. There was a silence as Tsunade surveyed the room. "Thank you all for your hard work today," she began, her voice resonating in the quiet room. "We managed to push back Orochimaru's forces, but this is far from over. We need to understand what happened today, and how we can better prepare for the future. It is regrettable for Utakata and Rashi to escape while we were dealing with the snake, but our major focus should be on Orochimaru right now." Iroha was the first to speak up. "Orochimaru's strength is undeniable," he began, his Hyuga eyes steely. "We must find a way to counteract his sage body and Sharingan." Kakashi nodded, his uncovered eyes thoughtful. "His tactics are also not to be underestimated. He used Kabuto's infiltration to disorient us and divide our forces. We'll have to find a way to guard against such ploys in the future." Amid the sober discussion, Koushin's voice echoed, carrying a hint of his usual joviality. "Well, we can't very well put a no snakes allowed sign at the entrance, can we?" His comment elicited a few chuckles, lifting the oppressive mood momentarily. Yet, his eyes remained serious. He was fully aware of the gravity of the situation. Kurenai interjected, "We also need to consider his knowledge of Jinjutsu. It's a significant advantage he holds over us." "Speaking of advantages," said Shikaku, "we shouldn't ignore our own. Koushin's ability to see through his illusions are mighty useful. We should devise plans around them." "Koushin," Shikaku began, turning his gaze towards the man holding Ino, "this ability you have to see through illusions, do you think you could teach it to others?" Koushin gave a light-hearted chuckle, a soft smile playing on his lips as he shifted Ino's weight in his arms. "Sorry, Shikaku, I'd love to play teacher," he replied, a hint of irony in his tone, "but this one's special, something unique to my summon realm. It's not something I can pass on." There was a small murmur of disappointment that echoed around the room, but it was quickly followed by a nod of understanding. The shinobi of Konoha were no strangers to unique abilities and bloodline limits. "But we're not completely defenseless," Jiraiya chimed in, leaning against the wall with a serious look on his face. "We can still strengthen our defenses against Jinjutsu, and improve our response tactics." "Indeed," Tsunade agreed, glancing at Sakura who nodded in silent acknowledgement. Kakashi was the next to speak. "We need to discuss Orochimaru's abilities in more detail. His Mangekyo Sharingan, his Sage Body, and of course, his Edo Tensei. Each of these are threats on their own, and combined, they're even more dangerous." The room was silent for a moment as they absorbed the gravity of the task ahead. Orochimaru's power was not to be underestimated, but neither were they. "Let's start with the Sage Body," suggested Iroha, his face set in a stern expression. Unlike traditional Sage mode, Orochimaru doesn't need to stay still to gather nature energy. He seems to have a near limitless supply of chakra because of it. We need a way to disrupt that flow or limit his chakra usage. "Disrupting nature energy flow is dangerous," interjected Kakashi. "An uncontrolled burst of nature energy could cause catastrophic damage." Then we'll need to focus on evasion and striking when he's vulnerable, Asuma suggested, his hands moving to his beard in thought. We saw in our battle that even Orochimaru couldn't maintain the sage body while simultaneously defending against multiple attacks. His Mangekyo Sharingan is also a threat, Kurenai spoke up, her red eyes intense. It gives him incredible Jinjutsu capabilities and an advantage in predicting our movements. I'm no Uchiha, Koushin quipped, but I've tangled with Sharingan before. Unpredictability is our friend there. It's harder to predict movements if they aren't linear or formulaic. That's true, said Kakashi, smiling slightly under his mask, and we have enough wild cards in our ranks to keep Orochimaru on his toes. Their discussion shifted towards the topic of Edo Tensei. This jutsu allowed Orochimaru to bring back the dead to fight on his behalf, a tool he used to horrifying effect. We need to be prepared for any shinobi Orochimaru might have acquired for Edo Tensei, Tsunade stated gravely. That means studying past opponents and devising strategies for each one. This isn't an ideal solution, Shikaku voiced, but we might need to consider destroying the bodies once they're reanimated. There was a brief, somber silence in the room. They all understood the weight of what Shikaku was suggesting. It was a difficult prospect, emotionally and morally, but it was a grim reality they had to face. The way I see it, Koushin said, his voice steady and calm, we're going to have to fight like hell and keep adapting. Orochimaru isn't going to make it easy, so we'll have to make it even harder for him. Despite the grim nature of the conversation, Koushin's words, true to his nature, managed to lighten the mood just a bit. There were nods of agreement and even a few small smiles. We have a long road ahead, Tsunade announced, standing up and looking around at the determined faces. But we're shinobi of Konoha. No matter how strong the enemy, we won't back down. We'll prepare, and we'll protect our village and people. This is our duty. Tsunade studied the note, her face hardening with frustration. She clenched her fists tightly, crumpling the parchment in her hand. Damn, she muttered under her breath, Akatsuki is after the Two-Tails Jinchuriki. Chapter 117, Bad News. A hush fell over the room as the weight of her words settled in. It seemed there was no rest for the weary. What happened? Naruto asked, breaking the silence, his voice laden with concern. Tsunade looked up at the group, her gaze filled with resolve. The Cloud has requested assistance, but I don't have anyone to send, she confessed, the frustration in her voice evident. Before anyone could respond, Koushin's voice echoed in the room, I can go, Lady Tsunade. He straightened up, his voice steady. I hardly spent any chakra. The room fell silent as everyone turned to Koushin. His statement was true. Despite the long battle they had just fought, he seemed the least fatigued amongst them. Even his usual joking demeanor was set aside, replaced with determination. Tsunade shook her head, I can't send you alone, Koushin. Ino, who was still nestled in Koushin's arms, stiffened at his words. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with worry. Koushin squeezed her gently in reassurance but didn't take his gaze off Tsunade. Just send an ANBU with me, and I'll be fine, Koushin responded, his tone level but assertive. The tension in the room was palpable. Tsunade was silent for a moment, studying Koushin's face, her eyes narrowing slightly. She could see the determination in his eyes, the willingness to step up where others couldn't. Hokage-sama, Shikaku spoke up, his voice cutting through the tension, Koushin is right. If he says he's good to go, then he's good to go. His abilities make him a formidable asset. Tsunade glanced at Shikaku, her gaze thoughtful. After a moment, she sighed and looked back at Koushin. If I send you, it would be under one condition, she started, her gaze stern, you don't engage directly with Akatsuki. Your primary mission is to aid Cloud, ensure the Jinchuriki's safety and get back home. Do you understand? Koushin nodded, a small grin playing on his lips, understood. Rescue mission, not looking for trouble, got it. Tsunade nodded, good. I'll arrange for an ANBU to accompany you. Leave as soon as you're ready. The room was silent for a moment after Tsunade's announcement, the air thick with worry and uncertainty. Ino, nestled in Koushin's arms, stiffened at his words, a worried look flashing across her face. Koushin glanced down at her, his grip tightening comfortingly around her. Despite the circumstances, Ino managed to muster a smile, her fingers curling tighter around his arm. She trusted him, and his confidence bolstered her own. "All right, here's the situation," Tsunade began, unfolding a map across her desk. The map detailed the Land of Fire's proximity to the Land of Lightning and the location of the Two Tails Jinchuriki. The Jinchuriki is located closer to Konoha than to Kumo. Cloud has requested our assistance to secure the Jinchuriki's safety before Akatsuki gets to her. Koushin leaned forward, studying the map. His mind began to formulate potential routes and strategies. As he focused, Tsunade looked at the others. "You're dismissed for now. Rest, and be ready for anything." As the room cleared, Tsunade turned her attention back to Koushin, her face a mask of seriousness. "Tenzo," she called out. There was a sudden gust of wind and an umbu appeared before them, garbed in the standard attire of the elite shinobi force, a black, sleeveless jumper under a gray flak jacket, strapped-up shinobi sandals, and arm-length gloves with guards over them. He carried a sword strapped to his back. His face was concealed behind a mask that resembled a cat's face, covered in green and red intricate markings. His black eyes were sharp and alert, reflecting an innate ability to perceive his surroundings in fine detail. His short brown hair was neatly combed, and the umbu tattoo was visible on his left shoulder. "Koushin," Tsunade said, nodding towards the umbu, "this is Tenzo, but in this mission his name will be Yamato. He's one of our best. He'll accompany you on this mission." Yamato dipped his head in acknowledgement, his gaze locking onto Koushin's with a serious and focused intensity. Koushin took in the umbu's appearance, making note of the stern look in Yamato's eyes, the mask hiding his features, the sword strapped to his back, and the confident stance. "A pleasure," he returned, inclining his head slightly in respect. His voice was light, but his eyes mirrored the same seriousness. Tsunade's stern gaze swept over Koushin and Yamato, a tightness set in her jaw as she stressed the gravity of their mission. "I'm going to repeat this, because it's crucial to your survival. Do not engage Akatsuki directly unless absolutely necessary. Your mission is to assist Cloud, secure the Jinchuriki, and get out safely. That's it." The Hokage's voice echoed through the silent room, as unyielding as the stone face carved into the mountain outside. Yamato met Tsunade's gaze with an unwavering expression, his fingers tapping against the hilt of his sword in acknowledgement. He then reached for his umbu mask, pulling it off to reveal his calm, sharp features. His short brown hair was neatly combed, and his black almond-shaped eyes held an alert, vigilant look. "Understood, Hokage-sama," Yamato responded, his voice steady. His eyes shifted towards Koushin, extending a silent commitment to the upcoming mission. Koushin's usual humor was shelved, his face a picture of seriousness as he mirrored Yamato's words, crystal clear, "Lady Tsunade." "Good," Tsunade nodded, her gaze unwavering as it bore into both of them. "You should depart immediately. The sooner you reach the Jinchuriki, the better." Koushin rose from his seat, his muscles flexing subtly beneath the fabric of his outfit, a testament to his physical strength and agility. His eyes sparkled with an intensity, a sure sign of his mental readiness. "Then we'll be on our way," he declared, his voice carrying an undertone of determination. Their destination was the Land of Lightning, a journey that would demand both speed and stealth. As they stepped out into the crisp air of Konoha, the village hidden in the leaves, the weight of their task felt tangible. Chapter 118, Inquiry. Yamato moved with an air of trained discipline, his movements precise and calculated. As the more experienced ninja, his responsibility was not only to ensure the successful completion of the mission but also to watch out for Koushin. He knew the younger shinobi was more than capable, but his instinctive role as a protector was ingrained in his very being. They moved swiftly through the village, their synchronized steps creating a rhythm of their own. The usually bustling streets of Konoha seemed to still as the pair passed, a silent salute to their important mission. As they reached the village gate, they saw the eternal gate guards Kotetsu and Izumo, who greeted Koushin with a smile. Off on another mission already, Koushin? Izumo asked, his gaze going to the stoic Yamato at Koushin's side. Koushin just shrugged and gave them a quick nod. It's the life we live, right? Kotetsu joined in, yeah, but still, you just got back from a rough one. You sure you're up for this? Koushin's grin turned slightly cheeky. If you're that worried, you can always come along, Kotetsu. Kotetsu laughed at the idea. My cousin's out fighting Akatsuki, and what do I get? Guard duty. He said it like it was a punchline, despite the seriousness of the situation. With a final grin, Koushin bid farewell to the gate guards. Watch the village for us, guys, he called out, his voice laced with respect. The unspoken promise hung in the air, a pact between protectors. Then, in a whirl of dust, Koushin and Yamato were off, leaving the comfort and familiarity of Konoha behind. As they sprinted through the trees, the wind whipping past them, Yamato found himself trying to initiate a conversation. It was no secret that he wasn't exactly a master of social interaction, but the silence between them was becoming stifling. Yamato began, his usually steady voice slightly hesitant, I heard about your recent encounter with Orochimaru. He paused, carefully picking his words. How was that? Koushin shot Yamato a sidelong glance, the corner of his lips twitching into a smirk. It was like a bad dinner date, he joked, the humor in his voice not quite reaching his eyes. Good food, terrible company. That guy really knows how to ruin a party. Yamato cracked a small smile, but his black eyes were somber. He could sense the undercurrent of tension beneath Koushin's humor. They continued their journey, the only sound being the rustling of leaves and the occasional call of a distant bird. After a moment of silence, Koushin's voice broke through again, his tone more serious this time. Do you have a past with Orochimaru? The question seemed to catch Yamato off guard, his stride faltering for a second. He quickly recovered, but not before a flicker of surprise and a trace of unease crossed his face. He turned to Koushin, the stoic mask he wore shifting slightly. What makes you say that? He asked, his voice was tight and strained, the question hanging heavy between them. Koushin didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the path ahead. I can sense emotions, he finally answered, his tone neutral. Part of my training in my summon realm. Your voice, it changes when you say Orochimaru's name. There's hatred there. For a moment, Yamato was silent, as though weighing the decision to share or withhold his past. Finally, he gave a small nod, his gaze far away. Yes, he admitted quietly, the single word carrying a multitude of unspoken sentiments. The bitterness in his voice was clear, a testament to a past that was evidently painful. Koushin knew about Yamato's past, about his connection with Orochimaru. But revealing such extensive knowledge would be suspicious, and his usual excuse of being an avid reader wouldn't pass in this case. Yamato's history was one shrouded in secrecy, known only to a select few. He had to tread carefully, prompting Yamato without alarming him. An Umbu operative of your caliber, Koushin started, his tone carefully casual, must have faced all kinds of villains. But your hatred for Orochimaru, it feels personal. Yamato's face hardened, his almond-shaped eyes narrowed slightly. That's because it is, he admitted, a tinge of bitterness creeping into his voice. Despite his curiosity, Koushin was mindful of the fact that Yamato's past with Orochimaru was a sensitive topic. He chose his next words carefully. Did you encounter him during a mission? The question was intentionally broad, a safe inquiry that wouldn't press too hard on any specific details. Yamato hesitated for a moment, likely considering how much to share. Finally, he responded, his voice a low murmur. You could say that. A few silent moments passed between them, the tension palpable. Koushin, however, didn't push further. He respected the older shinobi's privacy and knew better than to probe too deeply into a wound that was clearly still tender. Instead, he decided to lighten the atmosphere a bit. Well, if it makes you feel any better, he's not exactly on my people I'd love to meet again list either. Yamato cracked a smile, despite the heavy conversation. I'll bet. I heard he gave you quite a run during your last encounter. Koushin shrugged nonchalantly, but his eyes betrayed his seriousness. Let's just say it was a learning experience. We have to be ready for anything. Yamato nodded, his smile fading. You're right. Orochimaru's unpredictability is one of his most dangerous traits. You speak from experience? Koushin probed gently, attempting to coax out a bit more information. Yamato hesitated, his gaze unreadable. Let's just say, Orochimaru and I crossed paths long before I joined the Umbu. Their journey was swift and uneventful, both shinobi adept at traversing long distances in the blink of an eye. The landscape blurred as Koushin and Yamato moved at breakneck speeds, their respective chakra propelling them through dense forests and over towering mountains. As they neared their destination, Koushin felt a shiver of anticipation run down his spine. The faint hum of lightning in the air, a distant echo of the power that resided within the land of lightning. It was a testament to the raw, untamed power that Yujito Ni, the Two-Tails Jinchuriki, possessed. They arrived at an underground canal system, the labyrinthine tunnels stretching out beneath them. The stillness of the area was shattered when a ground-shaking explosion echoed through the cavernous space. Chapter 119, Crushing the Party. Koushin's eyes narrowed. He recognized the place. Yujito had used the same tactic in the original series. Hurry up, he urged Yamato, his gaze focused on the crumbling tunnels. His body began to crackle with energy, a brilliant display of lightning chakra dancing over his skin. Lightning chakra cloak. Koushin took off, his movements blindingly fast under the boost of the lightning cloak. He swiftly arrived at a building, recognizing it as the location hiding the underground canal system. Concentrating his lightning chakra, he created a giant lightning rasen drill, which he used to bore into the ground. The ground gave way beneath them, and Koushin and Yamato fell into the depths of the tunnel. Landing deftly on their feet, they took in the sight before them. Yujito Ni stood her ground, her petite frame contrasting with the raw power radiating from her. Her long, wavy blonde hair cascaded down her back, tied at the ends with a red band, matching the color of her eyes. She wore a simple outfit, a tight-fitting blue top over dark shorts, her look completed by the Kumo forehead protector secured around her neck. Despite her seemingly delicate appearance, there was a fierce determination in her gaze, a burning will that reflected her status as a Jinchuriki. Opposite her, two figures loomed, unmistakably the Akatsuki members Hidan and Kisame. Hidan, the immortal zealot, stood tall and lean, his silver hair pulled back from his face and secured at the base of his neck. His eyes, a piercing amethyst, gleamed with a fanatic zeal. He wore the customary Akatsuki cloak, the red clouds prominent against the black fabric. His three-bladed scythe was slung over his shoulder, its cruel points gleaming menacingly. Next to Hidan was Kisame, a daunting figure with his shark-like features and blue skin. He was broad and muscular, his body dwarfing Hidan's by comparison. His spiky white hair contrasted sharply with his skin, and his wide, sharp-toothed grin created an intimidating facade. Resting casually in his hands was his famed sword, Samahana, its scales bristling in anticipation. "Ah, we have company," Hidan noted, his gaze drifting to Koushin and Yamato. Kisame's eyes flickered towards the newcomers, his grin widening. "I hope you're not here for a rescue mission, because you're too late." Yujito's gaze met the newcomers, her surprise evident. Her eyes darted to Koushin, his body ablaze with an aura of crackling lightning energy, mirroring that of her Raikage. She squinted at him, suspicion flashing across her eyes. "Why are you here?" she questioned, her voice echoing through the cavernous space. "How did you find us?" Koushin stood tall, his eyes narrowed and his posture relaxed. He didn't bother to hide his aura, allowing it to crackle around him in a demonstration of his power. His tone was calm, yet held a hint of urgency as he responded. "The Raikage received a distress signal from you. We've been on your trail since then. Lucky for us, we made it in time." A tense silence ensued, the air palpable with anticipation. Yujito eyed him warily, her stance slightly less defensive than before. She glanced at Yamato, who remained silent but vigilant. His gaze was locked onto the two Akatsuki members, his body rigid and ready for any unexpected move. With a swift movement, Koushin and Yamato positioned themselves next to Yujito, presenting a unified front against their adversaries. A smirk played on Koushin's lips, his eyes dancing with a mixture of amusement and determination. "Well," Koushin started, his voice ringing with a mocking edge, "isn't this a charming gathering?" A sadist with a dangerous sense of fashion, he nodded towards Hidan, and a walking shark with an even more horrendous blade, he continued, flicking his gaze to Kisame. "And they call us weird." Hidan's eyes narrowed at the words, but a smug smirk formed on his lips. Kisame, however, simply chuckled at the comment, his grin never fading. As they settled into position, Koushin glanced at Yujito, his tone dropping to a serious whisper. "Hidan is an immortal and his scythe isn't just for show. He carries out a ritual, turning pain into a weapon. He can inflict damage upon himself and transmit that same harm to his opponent." His gaze then moved to Kisame. Kisame's a different breed. His sword, Samahata, can absorb and feed on an opponent's chakra. And Kisame himself is known as the tailless tailed beast due to his massive chakra reserves. As he finished the briefing, Yujito glanced at Koushin, her gaze reflecting a newfound respect. Even Yamato seemed slightly taken aback by Koushin's quick assessment. "Impressive analysis," Yamato remarked, his voice steady. "But I'm sure they have some tricks up their sleeves that we're not aware of." Koushin shrugged, a nonchalant smile spreading across his face. "Isn't that the beauty of our job? Always full of surprises." His voice held a note of sarcasm, but there was a serious undertone to his words. As they faced the Akatsuki members, Yujito turned her gaze towards Koushin, a newfound trust reflected in her eyes. With a silent nod, she took a battle stance, the latent energy in the room heightening as the trio prepared for battle. "Let's show them what we're made of," she said, her voice steady and unwavering. She looked at the shinobi standing by her side, a newfound sense of determination burning in her eyes. Koushin's smirk grew wider, his body humming with electricity. "Before that, I would like to try something." His voice echoed off the cavern walls, punctuating the palpable tension in the air. He bit his thumb swiftly, drawing blood. His hands danced through a series of seals, and with a stomp of his foot against the ground, he called out, summoning jutsu. In a puff of smoke, two enormous figures materialized. One was a colossal creature of ice and frost, its form emanating a chill that immediately dropped the temperature of the cavern. The second was a whirling tornado-given form, a vortex of air shaped like a humanoid, its body whistling with the force of a storm. "I want to test these summons against you too, if you don't mind me." Koushin's voice held a tone of mock courtesy, a playful grin on his face. With a gesture of his hand, the frost Atronach lunged towards Kisame and the air Atronach charged at Hidan. Chapter 120, Atronachs. Hidan snarled, his scythe swinging around to meet the air Atronach's onslaught. "Don't underestimate us, you brat," he hissed, his eyes gleaming with savage pleasure. His scythe clashed with the Atronach's body, sending sparks flying. But the force of the wind pushed him back, his feet sliding on the rocky ground. Kisame, on the other hand, faced the frost Atronach with a twisted grin, Samahata gripped firmly in his hands. "This will be interesting," he chuckled, his grin widening into a shark-like leer as he met the Atronach's assault. The blade of Samahata scraped against the icy body of the Atronach, shards of frost flying around them. Despite the creature's frosty assault, Kisame stood his ground, his brute strength matching that of the frost Atronach. From the sidelines, Koushin watched the battle unfold, his arms folded across his chest. Yamato and Yujito stood a few steps behind, their eyes darting from one battle to another. Yamato's expression was unreadable, his eyes sharp and focused. Yujito, on the other hand, seemed slightly taken aback by Koushin's audacity, her eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Your summons are unique," she admitted, her gaze flitting from the two enormous Atronachs back to Koushin. "Thank you," he replied, his voice filled with pride. "Took a while to train them. But enough about me. Let's focus on our dear friends over there. Back in the midst of the chaos, Hidan was struggling against the air Atronach's relentless assault. Despite his fervor, the force of the wind was proving a worthy adversary. He grunted, his sides slicing through the Atronach's body, but the creature merely reformed, the wound healing almost instantly. As for Kisame, his fight against the Frost Atronach was equally challenging. The Frosty Titan lunged at him, its icy fists landing heavy blows against his defense. Kisame, in turn, retaliated, Samahata slashing and gnashing against the Atronach's body. The mighty blade absorbed the frost energy, feeding Kisame's already vast reserves. Yet, the sheer physical power of the Frost Atronach was a force to be reckoned with, keeping Kisame on the defensive. Well. Atronachs, was it? Kisame's voice cut through the chaotic noise of battle, his grin still wide on his shark-like face. They're impressive. But let's see how they hold against this. His hands flashed through seals, water spiraling from his palm to form a massive vortex. Water release, great shark bullet technique. The vortex morphed into a giant shark, its watery maw wide open and headed straight for the Frost Atronach. The Atronach roared, meeting the water attack head-on. But instead of faltering, the Atronach seemed to strengthen under the aquatic onslaught. The water absorbed into its frosty form, and the shark bullet dissipated, leaving the Atronach looking noticeably more robust. Kisame blinked, taken aback. His grin wavered, replaced with a scowl. So, water feeds the ice, huh? Guess I'll have to try a different approach. He changed his hand seals, the resulting jutsu completely different from his typical repertoire. Flames flickered to life in his palm, growing in intensity. Fire release, great fireball technique. He blew forth a massive fireball, the heat radiating off it contrasting with the cold air surrounding the Frost Atronach. As the fireball met the Atronach, steam hissed and smoke billowed, obscuring Kisame's vision. When the smoke finally cleared, Kisame noted with satisfaction that the Frost Atronach had been slightly melted. Meanwhile, Hidan found himself at a similar disadvantage. He stood at a distance, panting heavily. His eyes flickered to his opponent, the air Atronach hovering before him, completely unscathed despite his relentless attacks. Damn it, he spat, wiping sweat from his brow. His eyes hardened as he glanced at Koushin, a spark of defiance igniting within him. His hands moved through seals, summoning a jutsu he rarely used. Earth release, Earth Dragon Bullet. The ground rumbled as a dragon made of rock and soil emerged, lunging at the air Atronach. The Atronach spiraled out of the way, its form becoming a whirlwind that dispersed the Earth Dragon. But as the dust cleared, Hidan was already preparing another jutsu. Fire release, Phoenix Sage Fire Technique. He spat out a volley of small fireballs, each homing in on the air Atronach. The fireballs exploded upon contact, causing the Atronach to momentarily falter. But as the flames dissipated, the Atronach reformed, seeming more agitated than before. Koushin watched the spectacle with interest, his arms crossed and a smirk playing on his lips. Well, they are certainly persistent, he commented, earning a nod from Yujito. They're Akatsuki, they won't go down without a fight, Yujito added, her eyes never leaving the battlefield. Koushin hummed in agreement, observing how Hidan and Kisame began to coordinate their attacks. They started alternating between fire and earth releases, the combined assault gradually overwhelming the Atronachs. Hidan, despite his usual recklessness, started aiming his attacks more strategically. He targeted the air Atronach's core, where the swirling wind was most concentrated. The repeated onslaught began to chip away at the creature's stability, making it more susceptible to Kisame's fiery attacks. Kisame, in the meantime, had gained a better grasp on his fire release. His attacks, though lacking in finesse, were effective. The heat gradually melted away the Frost Atronach's form, reducing its size and sapping its strength. Even without Samahata, Kisame was a formidable opponent. Chapter 121, Picking Battles. Finally, after an intense back and forth, the Atronach started to falter. The Frost Atronach had significantly reduced in size, its movements sluggish. The air Atronach, too, had lost its solid form, the swirling winds beginning to disperse. Taking advantage of the Atronach's weakened state, Kisame and Hidan attacked simultaneously. Kisame released a massive fireball, which slammed into the frost Atronach, causing it to shatter. Hidan, meanwhile, used an earth release to trap the air Atronach within a dome of earth, stifling its movements. Watching his Atronachs dissipate, Koushin let out a low chuckle. "I suppose that's enough playtime for now," he said, his tone filled with underlying anticipation. As Yamato observed the confidence creeping onto Koushin's face, a crease of worry etched into his forehead. He squared his shoulders, turning his focus onto the younger man. "Remember what Hokage-sama said, Koushin," he sternly reminded him, a seasoned air in his voice. "Our mission is to secure the Jinchuriki's exit." Koushin tilted his head, shaking it slightly. "Yamato-san, we're already neck-deep in this situation. I don't think they're just going to let us waltz out of here," he retorted, glancing over at the menacing figures of Kisame and Hidan. His eyes held a glimmer of audacious challenge, yet beneath that, a layer of calculated reasoning lurked, marking his words as more than just reckless bravado. Yujito watched the exchange between the two Konoha shinobi, her expression steadily growing more vexed. "I trapped them here to kill them, not to let some leaf ninjas mess up my plan," she snapped, her golden eyes flashing dangerously. "Remember your place. You came later. Don't go making plans on your own." Her aura shifted, a pulsating, bluish chakra radiating from her body. The chakra morphed and expanded, taking on the distinct shape of a gigantic feline. A soft growl reverberated in the air, causing Kisame and Hidan to momentarily shift their focus onto her. She stood, now clad in the spectral figure of the Two Tails, her aura imposing and fearsome. Koushin's eyes widened for a moment, admiration flashing through his gaze before he turned his attention back to Yamato and the Akatsuki members. "Well, you heard the lady," he said, gesturing towards Yujito. "She's calling the shots here, and I'm not one to argue with a fiery, two-tailed cat." Yamato's frown deepened at Koushin's words, but he refrained from making a retort, aware that their current situation needed unity, not petty disagreements. Nodding once in understanding, he prepared himself for the next phase of the fight. Koushin then turned back towards the Akatsuki duo, the light-hearted glint in his eyes replaced by a serious, steely gaze. "Leave Hidan to me. Deal with Kisame," he said. Yamato cast a skeptical look at Koushin. "Are you sure?" His voice carried a tinge of concern, his eyes flicking between the eager young ninja and Hidan, whose scythe glinted ominously in the dim light. Koushin met Yamato's gaze head-on, a seriousness that was unusual for him present in his eyes. "Positive," he replied, his tone resolute. "Hidan's no joke, Yamato-san, but he has patterns. I've been studying his moves during our fight with the Atronachs. I think I can handle him." Yamato's worry didn't ease. As the appointed leader of this mission, the safety of his team was his primary concern. Koushin might be confident, but Yamato had enough experience to know that the young shinobi could be underestimating his opponent. "And what if you can't?" Yamato pressed, his stern gaze never leaving Koushin. "If I can't," Koushin began, a playful smirk creeping onto his face as he added, "then you'll have the honor of saving my hide. Consider it an exciting addition to your mission, Yamato-san." Yamato raised an eyebrow at Koushin's nonchalant response, the tension in his features softening just a fraction. "Very well. But don't push your luck, Koushin. Remember, our primary objective is to protect Yujito." "I'm aware, Yamato-san," Koushin assured, his tone sincere. He turned his attention to Hidan, a determined glint in his eyes. Yamato watched Koushin for another moment before he turned his attention to Kisame. He hoped that Koushin's confidence was well-founded, for the Akatsuki were not to be taken lightly. He steeled himself, mentally preparing for the battle to come. Meanwhile, Yujito observed their exchange, her eyes narrowed slightly. She didn't particularly care about the Leaf Shinobi's plans, but their presence had become a variable in her own. She wasn't about to let them compromise her fun. As the Jinchuriki of the Two Tails, she wasn't one to be underestimated either. she trapped 2 Akatsuki members for sole purpose of killing them. Enough with your chatter, she snapped, her voice echoing ominously as it was amplified by the spectral figure of the Two Tails. Remember that the longer we linger, the more likely reinforcements will arrive. If you're going to act, do it now. Koushin looked at Yujito and snorted lightly. In the original, she had died due to her arrogance, despite her prowess and control over the Two Tails, Manatabi. However, it was Hidan and Kakuzu she underestimated then, not Kisame. And Kisame, with Samahata, was a formidable force. Even Killer Bee had trouble dealing with him, let alone Yujito. Bossy, kinky. Yujito's golden eyes narrowed at his tone, her spectral cat hissing, ears flat. Watch your tone, Leaf-Neen, she warned, her voice reverberating with a low, guttural growl. Koushin just shrugged, seemingly unfazed by her threat. His gaze shifted to Kisame, a contemplative gleam in his eyes. You're quite the piece of work, aren't you? He muttered to himself before addressing Hidan, hey, sideman, you're with me. Hidan's response was a malicious grin. Ready to die, kid? He taunted, twirling his weapon. Koushin, on the other hand, responded with a smirk. Why? Are you? His witty reply took Hidan aback, but Koushin didn't let the moment linger. He moved with a swift grace, covering the distance between him and Hidan. Simultaneously, Yamato and Yujito engaged Kisame. The shark-like man looked genuinely delighted at the prospect of facing them. This should be fun, he said, his voice like the rasp of sandpaper. Chapter 122, Kisame vs. Yamato and Yujito. You ready for this, Yujito? Yamato asked, casting a brief glance towards the Jinchuriki. Despite her brash demeanor, he respected her as a fellow shinobi and recognized her strength. But he was also acutely aware of the enemy they were about to engage. Kisame Hashigaki wasn't a man to be trifled with. Yujito, her form still shrouded in the intimidating silhouette of the Two Tails, didn't look his way. Instead, her gaze remained fixed on Kisame, a deep-rooted determination etched into her golden eyes. I didn't trap them here to play nice, Yamato, she retorted, her voice laced with a feral intensity that mirrored the spectral feline surrounding her. Just keep up. Yamato simply nodded, focusing his attention back onto Kisame. The Akatsuki member seemed surprisingly relaxed, considering he was about to face off against 2 formidable opponents. Don't underestimate them, Yamato muttered, Akatsuki are fearsome, watching as the shark man cracked his knuckles, a sinister grin playing on his lips. Well, aren't we in for a treat? Kisame's voice cut through the tense air, a hint of excitement lacing his words. His shark-like eyes gleamed with anticipation, his focus shifting between Yamato and Yujito. 2 against 1. And here I was thinking I wouldn't get to have any fun. Yamato spared a quick glance at Yujito, noting the dangerous swirl of blue chakra that enveloped her. He could sense the heat of her fire abilities, even from a distance. Turning back to face Kisame, he flexed his hands, letting the familiar surge of his would-release chakra course through him. Ready, Yujito? Yamato questioned, his voice firm. Yujito's answer was a snarl, as she charged towards Kisame, her blue chakra flaring brighter. Let's dance, Sharkman. Kisame grinned in response, holding out Samahata in anticipation. You're going to regret this. Yamato took off after Yujito, his feet carrying him swiftly across the field. He took the moment to form a series of hand seals, calling forth a technique to provide some initial support. Wood release, wood locking wall. A large, wooden barricade sprung up from the ground, separating Kisame from Koushin and Hidan's ongoing battle. Yamato didn't want any interference, especially not from the unpredictable Hidan. Kisame scowled at the wooden wall but shrugged. Just you and me then. He suddenly rushed forward, meeting Yujito in the center of their makeshift arena. Samahata swung down in a high arc, but Yujito moved nimbly, evading the swing and responding with a swift kick to his side. Yamato quickly moved to back her up, his hands forming the familiar seals for another jutsu. Would release, 4-pillar prison technique. for large wooden pillars sprung up, attempting to entrap Kisame within them. But Kisame was quick. Using a water release technique, he managed to evade the prison by converting his body into water, the wooden prison sinking harmlessly through him. No cheap tricks, Kisame taunted, appearing behind Yamato. He moved to strike him with Samahata, but Yamato reacted in time, rolling away from the Sharkman. Meanwhile, Yujito saw an opportunity. Taking a deep breath, she spewed a stream of blue fire towards Kisame, her chakra cloak lending strength to her flames. Blue flame bombardment. Caught off guard, Kisame was forced to defend, calling upon a water release technique of his own. Water release, water wall. A torrent of water sprung up before him, neutralizing the blue flames. Yamato watched Kisame, gauging his movements. The Akatsuki was formidable, there was no doubt. But Yamato wasn't one to back down either. I hope you're ready, Kisame. You're not the only one here who can manipulate water. Forming the necessary hand seals, Yamato called forth his technique. Water release, water dragon bullet technique. A huge water dragon materialized, roaring as it charged towards Kisame. Kisame met Yamato's gaze, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. This is more like it. He countered with his own technique, water release, great shark bullet technique. The two massive constructs collided with a resounding crash, creating a huge spray of water. Yujito took advantage of the distraction, calling upon her Biju's abilities once more. Blue Flame Hurricane. She unleashed a torrent of blue flames, swirling around Kisame like a tempest. The fiery assault took Kisame by surprise, his water defense weakened by Yamato's attack. The flames scorched him, eliciting a grunt of pain. But he quickly regained his composure, meeting Yujito's gaze with a savage grin. Feisty, aren't we? Kisame chuckled, charging towards Yujito with Samahata at the ready. Yujito met his charge head-on, her chakra cloak flaring as she prepared for another round. Yamato quickly moved to assist, his wood-release chakra pooling in his hands as he formulated his next move. Their battle was far from over. I hope you're ready, Kisame, Yamato muttered, watching as the Akatsuki member engaged Yujito. Because we're not going down without a fight. Despite the chaotic, life-threatening situation they were in, Kisame's laughter echoed ominously in the large dome of water he created. The shark-like man reveled in the thrill of the battle, his bloodlust fueled by the fierce opponents he faced. Yujito and Yamato, on the other hand, showed no signs of amusement. They were in enemy territory, literally, and they knew it. The dome Kisame had created was his ultimate move, trapping his enemies in an environment where he had complete control. However, he hadn't accounted for one factor, Yujito's control over her two-tails chakra. Her Biju cloak emanated an intense heat that was turning the water around her into steam at an alarming rate. The result was a thick mist that permeated the dome, reducing visibility significantly. Persistent, aren't we? Kisame mocked, though a tinge of irritation leaked into his voice. The water was dissipating faster than he could replenish it, and his prey seemed far from being worn out. Yamato-san, Yujito's voice echoed, her form barely visible through the dense vapor. I think it's time to turn the tides. Yamato couldn't help but smirk at her pun, appreciating her courage even in the face of danger. Agreed, he replied, raising his hands to form a series of hand seals. He drew upon his unique ability, Wood Release. Wood Release, Hobi Technique. He commanded, and a barrage of wooden projectiles shot from his palms, their aim directed towards Kisame. Chapter 123, The Winner. Kisame, reacting swiftly, brought Samahata in front of him, blocking the incoming projectiles. You'll have to do better than that, he snarled, his eyes narrowing as he tried to spot his adversaries through the steam. Yujito seized this opportunity. The heat radiating from her chakra cloak intensified as she focused her energy. With a swift motion, she clapped her hands together, and the space around her ignited with vibrant blue flames. Fiery wind! The sudden gush of heat clashed with the water dome, causing it to hiss and evaporate rapidly. Yujito's flames whipped around her in a furious cyclone, tearing through the vapor and making Kisame recoil. Persistent indeed, Kisame grumbled, his eyes flickering warily between the blazing Jinchuriki and the calm yet intimidating Yamato. Yamato, using this opportunity, launched himself towards Kisame, his fist hardened with a coating of wood-release chakra. Kisame swung Samahana to intercept, but Yamato twisted midair, kicking at Kisame's face while his attention was diverted. Kisame grunted as Yamato's boot connected, forcing him to stumble back. He raised Samahana in retaliation but paused when Yujito's voice echoed again. "Let's turn up the heat, shall we?" Yujito suggested, her tone darkly playful. Her form flared brighter, the chakra cloak pulsating with raw energy. She raised a hand, and a swirling ball of blue fire formed, growing larger by the second. Yamato, seeing her preparation, quickly formed his own hand seals. Would release, 4-pillar house technique. A wooden cage sprung up around Kisame, trapping him momentarily. "No more games," Yujito growled, her fiery sphere now a massive, flaming meteor. Her eyes were hardened by resolve, the radiating blue chakra illuminating her determined features. With a swift downward motion, she launched the fireball towards Kisame. Incinerating meteor! As the heat-filled sphere hurled towards him, Kisame scowled. He swiftly raised Samahana, its shark-like features mirroring his own fierce determination. "Water release, great waterfall technique," he roared. With an immense burst of chakra, a rushing column of water blasted from Samahana, barreling towards the oncoming meteor. The clash of elemental forces was spectacular. Steam billowed out as the water collided with the fire, hissing and spitting as if angry at being disturbed. But the meteor, fueled by Yujito's unwavering will and immense chakra, continued its course. Watching the ongoing struggle, Yamato seized his opportunity. "Would release, with locking wall," he announced, forming a series of quick hand seals. In response, wooden beams erupted from the ground, rapidly assembling into a large cage that enveloped Kisame. Yamato aimed to trap the Akatsuki member, buying Yujito some time for her attack to hit its mark. Meanwhile, the water Kisame had conjured was evaporating under the intense heat of Yujito's meteor, the remnants turning into scorching hot steam. Yujito was pushing her limits, her chakra cloak pulsating with increasing intensity as she maintained her assault. Kisame was certainly feeling the pressure. Samahana, as voracious for chakra as it was, struggled to keep up with the amount needed to combat Yujito's fire. Kisame grunted, pouring more of his own chakra into the sword. Persistent indeed, he muttered, focusing all his efforts into fending off Yujito's relentless attack. "Goddamn stubborn." Kisame's voice trailed off, obscured by the deafening hiss of the steam. His attempt to combat Yujito's flaming onslaught was failing, and he felt his chakra waning. Samahana was insatiable, yes, but the limits of its power were being reached. Kisame felt the burns licking his flesh where his water release had failed to protect him, the scorching heat of Yujito's fire too much to bear. He was trapped, and he was at his limit. But he was not about to give up. With a resolute grunt, Kisame clasped onto Samahana, the sword seemingly responding to his silent plea. It shimmered momentarily before merging with him, his form bulking out as his wounds started to heal, the burns disappearing beneath his thickening skin. His gills appeared on his neck, providing a chance for survival in his water dome which was being superheated by Yujito's flames. "Seems like you're not having a fun time, Kisame." The voice echoed in the steam-filled dome, the figure belonging to it obscured. It was Yamato, his tone oddly calm yet brimming with hidden threat. "Perhaps you'd like a break?" His words ended with a hint of playful sarcasm. Yamato's form emerged from the steam, his hands forming a series of hand seals. "Would release, cutting technique." The wooden cage confining Kisame suddenly transformed into a flurry of sharp spikes, thrusting inward to pierce the Akatsuki member. However, Kisame was prepared. His newly formed gills flared, sucking in a great gulp of air before forcefully exhaling. "Water release, 1,000 feeding sharks." Suddenly, the water inside the dome morphed into a myriad of shark-shaped water clones, each one barreling towards the incoming wooden spikes. The two attacks clashed, creating a violent maelstrom of wood and water within the dome. Meanwhile, Yujito struggled to maintain her incinerating meteor. The sphere of fire had shrunk significantly since the clash began, its size reduced by the persistent water barrage. But the Jinchuriki held on, her will as fierce as the flames she wielded. Sweat trickled down her face, a clear testament to the immense strain she was under. Yamato noticed Yujito's struggling form through the chaos of his ongoing assault. His eyes softened momentarily, appreciating her tenacity. "Hold on, Yujito," he called out, his voice echoing through the water dome. "I've got your back." Kisame, despite the commotion, couldn't help but chuckle at Yamato's words. "You sure have a flair for drama, don't you?" he jeered, his shark-like grin returning. But the Akatsuki member's mockery was cut short as the wooden cage he was trapped in started transforming once more. "Would release, great forest technique," Yamato announced, and immediately the cage expanded, wooden tendrils reaching out to ensnare the water sharks Kisame had summoned. Kisame grunted, struggling against the restraining force. He had to admit, they were proving more troublesome than he'd anticipated. Meanwhile, Yujito gathered her remaining strength, pushing the flaming meteor with renewed vigor. The sphere surged forward, fueled by her sheer determination. Kisame could only watch in horror as the fiery attack descended upon him. He barely had time to raise Samahata in defense, but it was too late. The incinerating meteor made contact, causing an explosion that rocked the water dome. The steam cleared, revealing a severely injured Kisame, sprawled on the ground, his Samahata lying beside him. Yujito collapsed, exhaustion overtaking her as she allowed the chakra cloak to recede. She panted heavily, her body screaming in protest, but her gaze was triumphant as she looked at the downed Kisame. Chapter 124, Toying with Hidan. As Yamato summoned forth the wood release, wood-locking wall, to separate their battlefield, Koushin found himself left to face Hidan. The solid wooden barrier blocked out the sounds of Yujito's fiery onslaught and Kisame's aquatic defense, leaving a peculiar calm in its wake. Koushin glanced back at the wall, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Well, at least we'll have some privacy," he quipped, refocusing on Hidan. The Jashinist stood across from Koushin, side at the ready, his eyes gleaming with an unholy fervor. "You're all jokes, huh?" Hidan sneered. "Let's see how funny you'll be when you're dead." Still wearing his smirk, Koushin's form shimmered, and a cloak of bright chakra enveloped him. With a crackle of electricity, his lightning chakra mode was activated, increasing his speed to lightning-fast levels. He looked at Hidan, a glint of anticipation in his eyes. "All right, Hidan," he said, "let's dance." Hidan lunged at him, his sides slicing through the air. Koushin easily evaded the strike, sidestepping with a speed that left a brief afterimage. He watched Hidan's surprised expression with amusement. "You might need to be a bit faster than that," Koushin teased. Frustration crept onto Hidan's features as he launched attack after attack, each one narrowly avoided by Koushin. The latter danced around Hidan with a grace that belied the lethal nature of their battle, his movements fluid and swift, like a leaf carried by the wind. "You're a slippery one, aren't you?" Hidan spat, his voice laced with annoyance. Koushin's smirk deepened. "Or maybe you're just too slow," he retorted, ducking under another swing of Hidan's scythe. With every dodge and witty remark, Hidan's anger grew, his side strikes becoming more wild and desperate. Koushin remained unfazed, maintaining his mirthful demeanor. His evasion was precise, calculated, never more than necessary, a humiliating showcase of the difference in their speed. "Haven't hit your stride yet, Hidan?" Koushin's voice dripped with sarcasm. "I'm starting to think you're not even trying." Hidan roared, his rage pouring into a furious onslaught. Yet, his efforts proved fruitless as Koushin continued his dance of evasion. In a sudden change of pace, Koushin moved from defense to offense. "Enough of this," he said, his tone firm yet light-hearted. With a swift forward motion, Koushin launched towards Hidan, his lightning chakra cloak trailing behind him. The shift from defense to offense was rapid but deliberate, his eyes reflecting a playful glint. However, in his onslaught, Koushin accidentally left an opening. His right flank was seemingly exposed, a perfect opportunity for Hidan to strike. With a triumphant grin, Hidan seized the chance, swinging his scythe towards Koushin's side. "Got you!" he exclaimed, his eyes gleaming with wicked satisfaction. He reveled in the sight of Koushin's surprise, eagerly anticipating the imminent tear of flesh, the gush of blood, and the screams of agony. But instead of the gruesome symphony Hidan expected, there was only the harsh clash of metal against metal. Confusion etched on his face, he glanced down, only to see Koushin's arm transformed. It was pitch black, reflecting a metallic sheen, unscathed by his scythe's vicious attack. Koushin looked at Hidan, an unabashed grin spread across his face. "Sorry, it was all fake," he said, his tone laced with mirth. "Did you really think I'd let you get me that easily?" He flexed his hand, the ebony skin retaining its solid form. Koushin had spent plenty of time upgrading the iron skin perk in Oblivion, and it was paying off now. The skin was nearly as tough as ebony armor, impervious to normal weapons like Hidan's scythe. Even though it required considerable chakra, he deemed it worth for a foe like Hidan. His smile still intact, Koushin quickly moved into action. He rushed towards Hidan with lightning-fast speed, his hand shifting back to normal as he prepared to strike. "You should learn to keep up," he taunted, delivering a swift punch that sent Hidan stumbling back. Hidan quickly regained his footing, scowling at Koushin. His swings became more desperate, the frustration evident in his movements. Koushin continued to dodge effortlessly, his agility and speed making a mockery of Hidan's attacks. "You like to torture your opponents with your sick ritual, right?" Koushin grinned at Hidan, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the fight. "You and your twisted god get off on the suffering of others. Let me show you what real pain is then." Hidan's face twisted with rage at the insult to his god. "You dare to insult Jashin-sama? You will pay for your blasphemy." Ignoring Hidan's anger, Koushin focused his chakra into his fists. "Elemental blast," he announced, a surge of electricity wrapping around his right fist, flames enveloping his left, and his knuckles turning as hard as stone, displaying his mastery over the three elements. "Let's see how you like this." Launching forward with his lightning-infused speed, Koushin struck first with the lightning fist. He targeted Hidan's chest, delivering a swift punch that sent a shock of electricity coursing through the Akatsuki member's body. The force of the strike sent Hidan stumbling backward, his body spasming from the unexpected shock. "You!" Hidan choked out, but his words were cut short as Koushin delivered a swift, stone-hard punch to his gut with the earth fist. The blow knocked the wind out of him, causing him to double over in pain. "You'll pay for this. And there's more where that came from," Koushin retorted, his voice filled with mirth. With that, he struck Hidan with the fire punch. The flame-encased fist connected with Hidan's side, causing an inward explosion that blasted the Jashinist off his feet and into the air. Hidan screamed as he crashed onto the ground, his clothes smoking from the burn. Still, Hidan pushed himself back up, his insane determination stemming from his devotion to his god. "You're a lot more interesting then." "I thought," he gasped out, glaring at Koushin. "That's the nicest thing anyone said to me today," Koushin said, chuckling. He launched himself at Hidan again, landing a series of punches imbued with various elements, keeping the Akatsuki member off balance. "Having fun yet?" Koushin teased, landing a solid hit with his earth fist that made Hidan wince. "I've got to admit, it's more fun than I thought it would be." "I'll kill you," Hidan growled, attempting to retaliate. But Koushin's lightning-infused speed made it difficult for Hidan to land a hit. Chapter 125, Arrival of A. Seeing Hidan struggle back to his feet, Koushin couldn't help but admire the man's stubbornness, twisted as it was. "Look at you," he commented with a grin, still ready for a beating even after taking all those hits. "You're a glutton for punishment." Hidan spat out a mouthful of blood, smirking defiantly. It's not me who will be punished. Jashin-sama will smite you for your arrogance. Blah, 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 your god this, your god that, Koushin said, rolling his eyes dramatically. Can't you talk about anything else? Rage flared in Hidan's eyes, his grip tightening around his scythe. He charged at Koushin again, his movements fueled by his anger. But Koushin was already on the move, using his lightning chakra mode to dodge and weave through Hidan's reckless attacks. He retaliated with his own punches, each one hitting harder than the last, sending Hidan stumbling back with every strike. Finally, Koushin raised his fire-encased fist, pulling his arm back for the final blow. Ready for the grand finale? He asked, his voice laced with anticipation. Like hell! Hidan shot back, but it was too late. Koushin's punch landed squarely in Hidan's chest, the resulting explosion throwing Hidan backward and creating a massive hole in the ground. The explosion was so intense that it carved through the Earth's surface, leading to a dark, seemingly endless underground cave system. Hidan fell, his body tumbling into the hole. His eyes never left Koushin, the rage and determination burning bright. My God, we'll punish you for this, he snarled, his words echoing up the hole. Is that so? Koushin replied, peering down into the darkness. He had to admit, he was somewhat impressed by Hidan's unwavering faith. But it was that very faith that had led to his downfall. He crossed his arms over his chest, regarding the fallen Akatsuki member with a finality that chilled even the hot-headed Hidan. You want to see a god, Hidan? He said, his voice dropping low. The next 4 words came out as a quiet yet resounding declaration. I am your god. With a swift movement, Koushin channeled his chakra into the ground. The earth trembled and the cave system exploded, burying Hidan deep within the debris. The defiant screams of Hidan were muffled as tons of rocks and earth collapsed onto him, cursing him to a life worse than death. Koushin stepped back, surveying the aftermath of the battle. He gave a small nod, content with the result. Well, that's one way to put someone in their place, he mused, his voice echoing across the now silent battlefield. After an earth-shattering victory against Hidan, Koushin returned to his comrade's side, a thin layer of dust settling onto his white robe as he moved. The battlefield was a mess of scorched earth and lingering smoke, evidence of a fierce fight that had ensued. As he approached Yamato and Yujito, Koushin took in the sight before him. Yujito was on her knees, panting heavily and looking worse for wear. Yamato, standing protectively by her side, appeared drained too, his usually stern face lined with exhaustion. Lying not too far away was Kisame, who was struggling to sit upright. His infamous blade, Samahata, lay next to him, writhing like a living creature. Even in his weakened state, the glint in Kisame's shark-like eyes spoke of a warrior who would not go down without a fight. Ah, seems like you've caught a big fish, Koushin commented, nodding towards Kisame. His tone was light, but his gaze was analytical, taking in the Akatsuki member's injuries. We did, Yamato replied, maintaining his stoic expression. He turned to Koushin. He put up quite a fight. Yujito managed a weak chuckle. That's an understatement. He was like a raging tsunami. Ignoring the casual banter, Kisame coughed up a bit of blood and smirked. You flatter me. I'm just a lowly shark. Koushin tilted his head, eyeing the fallen shinobi curiously. A shark who can summon tsunamis, no less. Koushin's gaze returned to Kisame, his mind whirring with thoughts and possibilities. Itachi, in original timeline, had shared a unique bond with the Sharkman. They were both members of the dreaded Akatsuki, yet their camaraderie had always struck Koushin as deeper than mere organization loyalty. If Kisame were to die here, would Itachi come after him? Koushin knew very well that crossing paths with Itachi was not a pleasant prospect. Especially when the man went crazy for unknown, mysterious reason that had nothing to do with him. Not to mention Tobi, the masked man had a strange connection with Kisame. Losing Kisame might trigger an unforeseen reaction from him. Weighing these considerations, Koushin pondered whether to end Kisame's life or to throw the injured shark back into the ocean. Before Koushin could make his decision regarding Kisame, the remnants of a nearby wall exploded outward. A gale of dust and debris swirled around the large hole, the sudden commotion drawing everyone's attention. As the dust settled, two imposing figures stepped through the rubble, their powerful auras making the already battered Kisame visibly wince. The first man was a towering figure with a muscular physique that dwarfed even Kisame's large build. His dark skin was lined with tribal tattoos, his features stern and commanding. The glare of the Raiton armor flickered around him, crackling with potent energy. He was the fourth Raikage, A. Right behind him was a slightly shorter, equally muscular man. His skin was the same dark hue as the Raikage, and he had a distinct hairstyle with two pigtails that defied gravity. His eyes sparkled with an almost childish glee, contrasting with his daunting physique. The man was B, A's adopted brother and the Jinchuriki of the Eight Tails. A swept a harsh gaze over the battlefield, taking in the sight of Kisame sprawled on the ground and the other shinobi recovering from the intense fight. His stern features hardened even more, if possible. "What's the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice echoing in the ravaged surroundings. Chapter 126, I just invented it. Koushin offered a nonchalant shrug, his light tone masking the careful scrutiny he was subjecting the newcomers to. "Oh, we just had a bit of a shark problem," he gestured casually towards Kisame, earning a disgruntled huff from the wounded shinobi. B, who was surveying the scene with an odd look, perked up at Koushin's remark. "Shark problem?" he echoed, his eyes landing on Kisame and Samahata. His lips curved into an intrigued grin. "Interesting." A's gaze landed on Yujito, who was still recovering from the fight. Worry flickered in his eyes. "Yujito," he called out, concern seeping into his stern voice. "Are you all right?" Yujito managed a weak nod, pushing herself upright with visible effort. "I am, Lord Raikage," she answered, sounding as composed as her exhaustion would allow. With a grunt, Kisame tried to rise, only to be pinned down by Yamato's would release. He spat out a curse, glaring daggers at Yamato. "Yujito!" A's powerful voice echoed through the battlefield, worry bleeding into his stern tone. He moved towards the young woman, his steps heavy and determined. "I'm fine, Lord Raikage," Yujito said, pulling herself to her feet. Despite her exhaustion, she straightened her back, meeting the Raikage's gaze with a nod of respect. With a grunt, Kisame attempted to rise, only to be pinned down by Yamato's would release. "Damn it," he spat out, glaring daggers at Yamato. Ignoring Kisame's discontent, Yujito turned her attention back to the Raikage, a grim expression on her face. "There's something you need to know, A," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "Koushin can use the lightning chakra cloak." A blinked, taken aback. His gaze instantly shifted to Koushin, who was watching the scene unfold with an amused grin on his face. "What?" A's voice was more growl than speech, his fists clenched at his sides. "How is that possible?" "That technique is ours." B stepped forward, curiosity piqued. "Really now?" he questioned, his tone a mix of disbelief and fascination as he turned to Koushin. "Is that true, brother?" Koushin shrugged, his grin unyielding. "Well, you know what they say about imitation being the sincerest form of flattery," he said, chuckling at his own joke. Ignoring the light-hearted remark, A's gaze hardened. "I'm not amused," he ground out, his voice a deadly calm. "How did you learn it?" "Well, I'm guessing it was much the same way your ancestors did," Koushin replied, still grinning. His tone was casual, as if they were discussing the weather and not a fiercely protected combat technique. A's eyes narrowed, a low growl escaping him. "I don't recall giving you permission to study our secrets." The change in Koushin's demeanor was instantaneous, his smile faded, replaced by an expression of cold seriousness. "And I don't recall asking," he retorted, his voice ringing out, strong and defiant. "Your claim over the lightning chakra cloak is just as tenuous as any others. It's a technique, not a birthright. And I suggest you remember that." The tense silence that followed was finally broken by B, who let out a low whistle. "Bro, you've got guts," I'll give you that. Koushin's smile returned, but there was an edge to it now. I try, he said, then turned his attention back to Lord Raikage. If it wasn't for Yamato and me, Kumo would have lost a valuable Jinchuriki, and her, as well. Yujito's eyes widened at Koushin's words, her gaze shifting to her abdomen, the host of the two tails. Took a sharp breath, his hardened gaze softening as he looked at Yujito. Koushin continued, the humor in his voice replaced by a calm assertiveness. Techniques don't have owners, eh? They are tools to be mastered by those who have the skill and determination. If someone manages to reinvent them, you can't do much about it, can you? The air between Koushin and it crackled with tension, the Raikage's anger palpable. But it remained silent, his gaze fixed on Koushin, seemingly weighing his words. Took a menacing step forward, his chakra-flaring armor casting eerie shadows over his stern features. You have some nerve to speak that way, kid, he warned, his voice low and threatening. His gaze never left Koushin, taking in the young man's unwavering stance and defiant expression. Koushin simply raised an eyebrow, meeting the Raikage's intense gaze without flinching. Am I wrong? He challenged, his voice calm and steady. Frowned. You think you can just steal our techniques and walk away? Well, if you see it as theft, you're free to try and take it back. Koushin's dangerous smile made his words even more chilling. His gaze locked with the Raikage's, his clear and unwavering confidence matching A's stern gaze head-on. Growled, but his response was cut short as Koushin continued, but if you intend to act against me, make sure you're prepared to deal with the consequences, My techniques are my own. If you have a problem with that, you can try to act. Just make sure you end both Yamato and me here. And make sure neither of us are a clone. Yamato's eyes widened slightly at Koushin's bold words, but he didn't say anything. His gaze was focused on the tension in his posture matching the taut silence that followed Koushin's statement. Otherwise, Koushin added, a certain darkness in his eyes, Kumo would not only lose an ally against Akatsuki. His words hung in the air like a threat, tension thickening the atmosphere. Yujito swallowed hard, her gaze shifting between and Koushin. B merely tilted his head, his eyes wide with amusement. He was clearly enjoying the confrontation more than he should. Was silent for a moment, his gaze never leaving Koushin. His clenched fists told a different story than his calm exterior. Finally, he let out a low growl. This isn't over yet, Koushin, he said, his voice filled with underlying threat. Even if you manage to reinvent the technique of my clan, you can't go around and pass it out to anyone. Koushin shrugged, an almost bored look on his face. I don't recall planning to open a Lightning Chakra Cloak Academy, he said, the hint of amusement in his voice deflating some of the tension. Your clan's secrets are safe from a widespread distribution. I assure you. Grunted, clearly not appeased, but didn't press the matter further. He turned his attention towards Kisame, who was still pinned down by Yamato's wood release. And what about him? He asked, nodding towards the injured man. Koushin glanced at Kisame and then looked back at He shrugged nonchalantly. Your catch, your call, he said. We've completed our mission here. Chapter 127, He is your problem now. The Raikage studied Kisame for a moment, his expression unreadable. The shark-like man glared back defiantly, despite his weakened state. We'll take him into custody, finally said, his gaze shifting to Yujito. Ensure that he doesn't cause any more trouble. Yamato gave a nod, releasing his jutsu and allowing B and a few of the Raikage's accompanying shinobi to take control of Kisame. Despite the harsh treatment, Kisame remained defiant, his sharp gaze promising retribution. Koushin chuckled, the sound breaking the tense silence that had fallen after A's declaration. The Raikage turned to him, a frown marring his stern features. What's so amusing? Koushin shook his head, his eyes twinkling with mirth as he looked at A. Oh, nothing much, he began, his tone casual. I just thought it was interesting that you plan on keeping a high-ranked Akatsuki member in custody. Grunted, his frown deepening. You have a problem with that? No, not a problem. Just... Koushin paused, his eyes drifting over to Kisame, who was being hauled to his feet by B and a couple of the Raikage's accompanying shinobi. The defeated man was glaring at his captors with thinly veiled contempt. "Just what?" prompted, his patience clearly waning. Koushin turned back to the Raikage, a smirk playing on his lips. "Just good luck with that. Some Akatsuki members are known to teleport anywhere. Keeping him caged might be a bit more difficult than you think." A's gaze snapped back to Kisame, who smirked despite his predicament. There was a moment of tense silence before the Raikage growled. "We'll deal with that when we get to it." The response drew another chuckle from Koushin. "I'm sure you will," he said, his voice laced with amusement. He turned to Yamato, his grin fading slightly as he addressed the other man. "Let's go, Yamato-san." Yamato hesitated for a moment, his gaze drifting over to Yujito. The woman looked worn out but managed a nod, signaling her understanding. "Be careful," she murmured, offering a small, weary smile. "Don't worry," Koushin replied, a more serious note to his voice. He shared a meaningful glance with Yamato before they both turned and walked away, leaving A, B, and the sea-captured Kisame behind. As they retreated, I watched them with a thoughtful expression. Kisame, who was now secured in the custody of the Kumo shinobi, sneered at their departing figures. "Running away so soon?" he taunted, his voice a rasp. Koushin stopped in his tracks, turning back to regard Kisame. There was a pause, then a wry smile crossed Koushin's face. "Just leaving you in capable hands, Sharky," he quipped, not missing a beat. "I have faith in Kumo's hospitality." Ignoring Kisame's frustrated grunt, Koushin turned back around, signaling for Yamato to continue on their way. The two of them left the battlefield, their figures slowly disappearing from sight. Meanwhile, I turned his gaze to Kisame, his expression hard. "You better pray that your comrades come to rescue you," he said, his voice a threatening growl. "For your sake." Kisame merely laughed, the sound raspy and cruel. "Oh, I'm not worried," he replied, his grin unfaltering. The solid wooden doors of the Hokage's office opened to reveal Yamato and Koushin, their bodies battered and dirt-streaked from their recent battle. Tsunade looked up from her paperwork, her eyes widening in surprise and concern. "Yamato, Koushin, you're back sooner than expected," Tsunade remarked, rising from her chair and stepping forward. "What happened?" Yamato began, his voice steady and serious. "We came across two members of the Akatsuki, Lady Hokage. Kisame Hashigaki and Hidan." Tsunade's gaze hardened at the mention of the infamous organization. "Go on." "We were fortunate to find Yujito ni, the Two-Tails Jinchuriki, already engaged in combat with them," Yamato continued. "Kisame wielded a large sword named Samahana that could absorb chakra. Hidan was different and dangerous in a unique way. His immortality made him a tough adversary." Koushin chimed in with a slight smirk, though I must admit, immortality loses some of its charm when one is dismembered and buried under a pile of rubble. He had managed to keep his tone light, but the gravity of their encounter was clear. "Hidan's down for good?" Tsunade asked, leaning on her desk, her professional mask barely concealing her relief. Koushin nodded, "Unless he can tunnel out of rock without arms or legs." Tsunade nodded solemnly, then her gaze shifted to Yamato. "And Kisame?" "We managed to subdue him, Lady Hokage. Yujito and I combined our forces. But, just as we were about to apprehend him, the Raikage, A, and his brother, B, arrived." Tsunade's eyebrows furrowed as she digested the information. "So, the Raikage arrived and then?" Yamato glanced towards Koushin, who had taken a step back to lean against the wall. Even as he stood there, his eyes were steady on Tsunade. With a casual shrug, he said, "We handed Kisame over to them." "What?" Tsunade straightened up, her disbelief was clear. "Why would you hand over a captive Akatsuki member?" "Well, Lady Tsunade," Koushin began, his tone measured, matching the serious atmosphere of the room. "Allow me to elaborate. I have had the privilege of facing off against Hidan, and his immortality wasn't just a rumor. You should have seen it, really. I buried him under tons of rubble after dismembering him, and I have no doubt he's still down there, cursing away." He paused, watching Tsunade's eyes narrow in anticipation of the point he was leading to. "Simply put, capturing an Akatsuki isn't like detaining an ordinary criminal," he continued. "They're highly skilled, dangerous, and loyal to their cause. They have both the capability and the will to break free, causing havoc in the process." Yamato nodded in agreement. "Koushin is right, Lady Hokage. It was an uphill battle against Kisame, a shinobi with immense strength and a unique blade that posed a significant threat. We managed to subdue him, but maintaining that would have been nearly impossible, especially considering our injuries and depleted chakra reserves. And," Koushin added, "imagine if we had been successful in bringing him back, only for him to break free in the heart of Konoha. It would have been a disaster." Tsunade sat back, her mind whirling. "I understand the risks, but—" Koushin leaned forward, his casual demeanor vanishing as he locked eyes with Tsunade. "Lady Tsunade, we are talking about Kisame Hashigaki, not just some low-ranking Akatsuki. Even amongst them, he's one of the most powerful. Even if we had the means to keep him detained, it wouldn't have been for long. And if word got out that we had him in our custody, we'd be painting a huge target on Konoha." By handing him over to the Raikage, Yamato picked up where Koushin left off. "We've shifted the burden of his capture, and hence, the threat of an Akatsuki attack, onto the hidden cloud. The Raikage was more than willing to take him," Koushin added. "Claimed we owed him, in fact." Tsunade raised an eyebrow. "Owed him? For what?" "Well," Koushin said with a wry smile. "Apparently, my mastering of the lightning chakra cloak was a theft of their secret technique, according to him. I assured him it was just a display of my knack for lightning manipulation, but you know how touchy he can be." Tsunade sighed, the reality of their precarious situation setting in. "So, the Raikage has Kisame, and the hidden cloud will face the wrath of the Akatsuki if they attempt to rescue. Meanwhile, we have Hidan effectively out of the picture." Yamato and Koushin exchanged a look before Yamato finally broke the silence. "That's the long and short of it, Lady Hokage." Koushin leaned back against the wall, the ghost of his earlier smirk returning. "And hey, if the Akatsuki does manage to rescue Kisame, well, that'll be the cloud's mess to clean up. We'll have bought ourselves some time." Tsunade absorbed the report from her two shinobi, her fingers tapping on the polished surface of her desk in thought. The information was disturbing, but the outcome had its benefits. "Yamato, Koushin," she began, "it appears you handled an incredibly difficult situation well. The Akatsuki are no small matter, and the fact you've managed to neutralize Hidan and transfer the danger of Kisame to the hidden cloud, well, that's more than a win in my book." She met Yamato's steady gaze and then Koushin's, who held a mischievous twinkle in his eyes, despite the severity of the situation. "I'm proud of your performance. Thank you for your hard work and quick thinking." Koushin sighed audibly, a dramatic slouch in his posture as he rolled his eyes. "Finally, some appreciation. I was afraid I'd have to head back out there without so much as a pat on the back." Tsunade couldn't suppress her chuckle. "Well, if you want me to send you back out, I can certainly arrange that." "No, no, no," Koushin quickly countered, a grin playing on his lips. "I was merely jesting, Lady Tsunade. Besides, I've got urgent business to take care of." "Oh?" Tsunade quirked an eyebrow, curiosity piqued. "And what might that be?" With a dramatic sigh, Koushin straightened up, brushing a hand down the front of his dirt-smudged uniform. His eyes took on a faraway look as he said, "Well, Lady Tsunade, it involves a certain blonde kunoichi with a talent for flowers, a knack for fiery temperament and lovely eyes." Tsunade snorted, a knowing smile crossing her features. "Ino, I assume." Koushin's grin widened. "The one and only. I've missed her terribly, you know. These missions have kept us apart far too long. The horrors of duty." "And I'm sure Ino's been equally torn apart by your absence," Tsunade replied with a playful roll of her eyes. "Undoubtedly," Koushin agreed, all too eagerly. "Which is why, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to need at least 2 days, uninterrupted, to properly console my dear pumpkin. Snuggling, whispering sweet nothings, catching up on all the important village gossip she so loves to share, you understand, I'm sure. Yamato gave a short, barking laugh, hiding it quickly behind his hand. Koushin, didn't know you were as romantic as you are a warrior. Koushin shot a look at Yamato, his smirk growing. Of course, Yamato. Love is another battlefield, after all. Tsunade laughed heartily at this, shaking her head. All right, Koushin, you have your leave. 2 days of snuggling with Ino, as you so eloquently put it. But after that, I need you both back here and ready for duty. Koushin bowed dramatically, as you command, Lady Hokage. I shall brave the perils of love and return to you a man fulfilled. Chapter 128, Rabbit. Crisp wind flowed gently through Konoha, stirring the freshly bloomed flowers and leaves in the village. Koushin strolled down the village streets, clutching a delicate-looking box tied with a silky bow in his hand. His destination was Yamanaka Flowers, the best flower shop in the village. Upon reaching the front of the shop, he took a moment to adjust his clothes and take a deep breath. Pushing the door open, the faint sound of the bell tinkling signaled his entrance. Pumpkin-chan. Koushin called out, his voice warm with anticipation. He couldn't help but smile, gazing around at the vibrant array of colors and life. Ino's in the back, a soft, motherly voice answered instead. Koushin turned to see Ima arranging a vase of tulips on the counter. She'll be right out. How have you been, Koushin? Hello, mother-in-law, Koushin greeted her, a playful glint in his eyes. I've been well, thank you. And how have you been? Ima smiled warmly, shaking her head at his cheekiness. I don't see you making that till real, young man. And I've been well, thank you. Before Koushin could respond, a stern voice rang out from behind him, and you won't be if he keeps addressing you like that. Koushin turned to find Inoichi, standing there with a disapproving frown. Despite the stern exterior, there was a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. Brat, must I remind you again about proper manners? Koushin merely chuckled, bowing slightly. Apologies, father-in-law. Old habits die hard. Just as Inoichi opened his mouth to retort, the back door of the shop opened and out walked Ino, her golden hair tied up neatly as she balanced a tray of fresh flowers in her hands. Her blue eyes widened in surprise as she spotted Koushin. Koushin! You're back! Ino exclaimed, quickly setting the tray on the counter before rushing over to him. Yes, Pumpkin, I am, Koushin replied, grinning at her enthusiastic greeting. Did you miss me? Of course I did, you idiot, Ino replied, giving him a quick peck on the cheek. But, I didn't expect you back so soon. Well, Koushin said, offering her the box he was holding. I wanted to come back as soon as possible. I've missed you too, you know. Ino looked at the gift, a curious look crossing her face. What's this? Why don't you open it and see? Koushin encouraged. Open it? Ino repeated, eyeing the box skeptically. She turned her gaze back to Koushin, her eyes narrowing. You didn't put anything living in there, did you? Koushin threw back his head and laughed, a full-bodied sound that filled the shop. Would I do that, Ino-chan? Yes, you would, Ino replied with a snort. She began untying the silky bow with a shake of her head. One can never tell with you, Koushin. Ino hesitated, glancing up at Koushin with a raised eyebrow, then gingerly took the box. She pulled at the silky ribbon, letting it slip from the box and fall onto the counter. With the box now unsealed, she slowly opened it, her curiosity piqued. As the lid opened, Ino's eyes went wide. Nestled within the box, on a bed of velvety fabric, was a tiny, poorly made clay figurine. It was an odd, abstract shape, with exaggerated limbs and a lopsided face. In spite of, or perhaps because of, its imperfections, there was an endearing quality to the odd, little figure. In the world. Koushin, what is this? Ino asked, her voice teetering between laughter and incredulity. Koushin, seeing her reaction, couldn't hold back his own laughter. "It's art, Pumpkin. Don't you recognize it? It's a masterpiece." Ino giggled, picking up the small clay figure and studying it. "A masterpiece, huh? By whom, may I ask?" "Why, by the illustrious and world-renowned artist, of course," Koushin replied, puffing out his chest dramatically. "It's a limited edition, you know." Ino looked from the figurine to Koushin, a smile tugging at her lips. "And I suppose this is a self-portrait?" Koushin feigned offense, gasping dramatically as he placed a hand over his heart. "Ino! I'm shocked you would suggest such a thing. That is clearly a representation of the elusive and mysterious, three-tailed, rabbit." "Rabbit?" Ino echoed, her laughter ringing through the shop. "Yes," Koushin asserted, nodding seriously. "Remember, back in my first mission, my team and I were in a pinch, so I used a shadow clone, transformed it into a rabbit, and sent it hopping your way. You picked me up, snuggled me, and hugged me, thinking I was just some cute bunny." Ino frowned, an adorable crease forming between her brows as she tried to remember. "I don't think that." "And then, when you realized I wasn't just any rabbit, but a handsome, dashing shinobi transformed into one, you were so smitten that you couldn't resist my charm anymore," Koushin continued, his eyes sparkling mischievously as he embellished the tale. Ino stared at him for a moment before her laughter burst forth, filling the shop with its melodic sound. "You're such a fool, Koushin. Is that how it went? Because from what I remember, I was so shocked that I tossed you right into a pond." "Ah, yes, but it was a loving toss," Koushin retorted, grinning from ear to ear. "An affectionate fling." Ino shook her head, still giggling. "You're impossible, Koushin." "But you love me," Koushin shot back smoothly, his grin turning into a soft smile. He reached out, gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Ino blushed, looking down to hide the smile that was playing on her lips. She didn't confirm his statement, but she didn't deny it either. There was a comfortable silence as they looked at each other. Ino's fingers traced the shape of the clay figure, a fond smile dancing on her lips. The duo turned to see a woman standing at the entrance of the shop. She was stunning, with a body that would make a kunoichi envious, and her dress accentuated her curves perfectly. Her eyes twinkled with mischief as she admired Koushin. Koushin broke into a laugh, a genuine, hearty sound that reverberated through the room. He shot a glance at Ino, a teasing light in his eyes. "Pumpkin-chan, seems like I'm quite the catch, eh?" Ino felt a twinge of annoyance, her eyebrows furrowing as she glared at the woman. "I see you have eyes, but you seem to be lacking common sense," Ino retorted, a steely glint in her eyes. Koushin held up his hands in surrender, a playful smile still tugging at his lips. Now, ladies. Let's not fight over little old me." The woman laughed, a sultry sound that echoed around the room. "Oh, I'm not one for fighting, darling. I prefer negotiations." Ino crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes narrowed. "There's nothing to negotiate. He's not up for grabs." The woman raised an eyebrow at Ino's declaration, her lips curling into a smirk. "We'll see about that," she retorted, her gaze returning to Koushin. Koushin chuckled, his violet eyes sparkling with amusement as he stepped in between the two women. "As flattered as I am by the attention, ladies," he began, holding his hands up in a gesture of peace, "I should point out that I'm already spoken for." The woman's eyes widened slightly before she broke into a sultry smile, her gaze trailing over to Ino. "Is that so?" she asked, her voice filled with a playful challenge. "Oh, more than just so," Koushin confirmed, turning towards Ino with a soft smile playing on his lips. "You see, Ino here," he began, gesturing to the blonde woman by his side, "she's the star that brightens my night sky." Ino's cheeks flushed a soft pink at his words, her eyes sparkling with amusement and warmth. "That's cheesy, Koushin," she said, struggling to suppress a smile. "Oh, Pumpkin-chan, you haven't heard anything yet." Koushin retorted, his gaze still on her. You see, she's not just any star. She's a supernova. With just a single glance, she can outshine even the brightest constellation. Ino shook her head, biting back a laugh. You're laying it on thick now, aren't you? Well, Koushin responded, his hand reaching out to take hers. How about this? If love were a battlefield, Ino would be my victorious general, leading me to the sweet surrender of her affection. Ino rolled her eyes, though she was clearly fighting to suppress her laughter. And here I thought you were a shinobi, not a poet. The stranger watched the exchange, her eyes widening slightly in surprise at the playful yet intense dynamic between the two. Koushin simply winked at her, a hint of humor dancing in his eyes. I wear many hats, my dear. But at the moment, I'm quite content being Ino's devoted jester. Ino tried to stifle a giggle, her hand coming up to cover her mouth. Devoted jester? Koushin, you're absolutely ridiculous. Koushin shrugged, his grin broadening. Perhaps, but I'm your ridiculous jester, am I not? A soft chuckle escaped Ino's lips as she nodded. Yes, you are. And for the record, I wouldn't have it any other way. Turning to the woman who had sparked the whole exchange, Koushin offered a friendly smile. So, you see, my heart is fully occupied. There's no vacancy, not even for a moment's temptation. The woman held his gaze for a moment before finally breaking into a chuckle, her posture relaxing. Well, can't blame a girl for trying, right? She admitted, her eyes acknowledging Ino's presence for the first time. He's quite the catch, you know. Ino chuckled, nodding in agreement. Oh, I know, she confirmed, her blue eyes twinkling with delight as they met Koushin's gaze. But he's my catch. Koushin's lips quirked up in a smile at her words, his gaze full of affection. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a soft whisper meant only for her. And just for the record, Pumpkin, you're my catch too. My only catch. Ino blushed, her heart fluttering at his words. She nudged him playfully, the smile on her face showing her pleasure at his words. Well, that's settled then. The stranger, now realizing she had no chance, nodded, her smile wistful. The festival was in full swing, with bright lanterns illuminating the streets and music and laughter floating through the air. The aroma of local foods hung tantalizingly over the scene, drawing in people from every corner of the village. Koushin and Ino, both dressed in yukatas, found themselves in the heart of this beautiful chaos. Smell that, Ino? That's takoyaki. I bet you I could finish 10 in a minute, Koushin proclaimed, his mouth watering. 10? That's child's play. I could do 12. Ino retorted, a playful smirk on her face. No way, Koushin exclaimed in mock indignation, you're on. Loser gets the winner a prize from that game booth. With a laugh, they found a vendor and each ordered their portions. The vendor was bemused but willingly served the large portions to the duo. Koushin started with gusto, but the smug smile on Ino's face faltered as she realized her own boast was slightly more ambitious than she had initially thought. In the end, they both sat, red-faced and panting, a mound of takoyaki sticks lying in front of them. Koushin had won by a single piece, much to his delight. Well, that was ill-advised, Ino said, leaning back and patting her stomach. I think I won't need to eat for a week. Doesn't matter. A bet's a bet. Koushin reminded her, pointing to the game booth they had initially wagered on. It was one of those classic ones where you had to hit a target with a thrown ball. Ino got up reluctantly, but she was a woman of her word. She stepped up to the booth, took aim, and easily hit the target. Koushin got to pick his prize, a comically oversized stuffed frog. He looked delighted at his win. Best date ever, he proclaimed, holding up his frog triumphantly. Ino rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide her own smile. You only won because you're a bottomless pit, Koushin, she teased. Takes one to know one, he shot back playfully, offering her a hand to get up. As they moved on from the takoyaki stand, Koushin, draped in his navy blue yukata, offered his arm to Ino, her own yukata a beautiful palette of blossoms against a violet background. The streets were a vivid display of joy and celebration, families and friends all around enjoying the ambience. "Alright, where to next?" Koushin asked, his eyes glinting in excitement, the enormous stuffed frog slung over his shoulder. "You've already won that thing," Ino motioned toward the frog with a smirk. "Isn't it time you let me win something?" "How about I win you the world?" Koushin asked, his grin wide and teasing. Ino rolled her eyes at his audacious proclamation, her laughter light and infectious. "You couldn't handle the world, Koushin." "But I can handle you," he quipped, "and you are my world." Ino couldn't suppress a giggle at Koushin's audacious joke, the sound melodious and light, matching the warm ambience of the festival. "You are insufferable, Koushin," she said, although the smile on her face betrayed her amusement. "And you love it," Koushin retorted, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he playfully nudged her. Laughing, they moved on from the booth, arms linked and spirits high. The festive energy was contagious, infusing their every step with the merriment that danced in the air. "Oh look! Cotton candy!" Koushin pointed towards a small stall, a cloud of spun sugar taking form before their eyes. "We just ate takoyaki. Are you trying to make me sick?" Ino teased, raising an eyebrow at his voracious appetite. "Maybe a little sugar will help us digest," he suggested with a grin. After purchasing a large cotton candy cloud, they strolled down the illuminated path, their laughter mingling with the lively chatter around them. Koushin, like an excited child, took an oversized bite of the candy and offered it to Ino. She accepted, her smile softened with warmth at his enthusiasm. Their next stop was a ring toss game. Koushin, the ever-competitive spirit, was determined to win, his eyes filled with determination as he studied the arrangement of the bottles. "Getting serious, aren't we?" Ino teased, leaning against the booth's edge. He stuck his tongue out at her, a playful gesture that had her laughing. Despite her teasing, his aim was true, and he won the game with ease. He picked a small, cute charm as the prize, presenting it to Ino with a flourish. As the night grew darker, the festival's lights seemed to glow even brighter, casting playful shadows on the bustling crowd. Koushin and Ino continued their meandering, his arm linked with hers. The laughter and excitement of the festival goers were contagious, making it impossible for them not to join in. "Hey, Ino, look at that!" Koushin pointed to a caricature artist, busy capturing the essence of a young couple on paper. "How about we give it a shot?" Ino peered at the artist, then back at him with a smirk. "Do you really want to see your big head on paper?" Koushin feigned hurt, placing a hand over his heart dramatically. "That's low, Ino. But fine, I get it. You're just scared the artist won't be able to capture your beauty." Ino playfully nudged him with her elbow, causing Koushin to chuckle. "Oh, so that's how it is, huh? Alright then, let's do it." Hand in hand, they made their way to the caricature artist, an older man with a twinkle in his eyes. As they sat down, Koushin squeezed Ino's hand reassuringly, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the older man. The artist looked at them, studying their faces, capturing their playful banter. With swift strokes, he managed to capture not only their likeness but their unique chemistry as well. Koushin and Ino were in fits of laughter by the time the artist presented his work, their joyous faces mirrored in the caricature. "Not bad, right?" Koushin commented, a mischievous gleam in his eyes. "It looks just like us." Ino nodded, her eyes twinkling with mirth. "Yes, your big head looks just right," she retorted. Hand in hand, they strolled towards the edge of the village, away from the hubbub of the festival. A serene river, reflecting the shimmering festival lights, greeted them, and they found a secluded spot to settle down. Koushin took a seat on the cool grass, his yukata rustling softly, and Ino nestled comfortably against his chest, her back to his front. His arms wrapped around her, as naturally as if they were designed to be there, pulling her closer into his warm embrace. He buried his face in her hair, taking in the scent of her, and a soft sigh escaped his lips. He pressed a tender kiss to her nape, and she turned her head to meet his eyes, her own twinkling with unspoken affection. Her hand came up to caress his cheek, and he leaned into her touch, his eyes never leaving hers. "Comfortable," he murmured, his voice soft and low. Very," she replied, a content smile gracing her lips. Just then, the sky lit up with the first wave of fireworks, a stunning display of lights and colors. A gasp of awe escaped her lips, and Koushin tightened his hold around her, a sense of peace washing over him. They sat there, watching as the spectacle unfolded in the sky, the colorful explosions mirrored in the rippling surface of the river. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Ino whispered, her voice full of wonder. "Not as beautiful as you," Koushin responded, his voice barely above a whisper. His fingers traced invisible patterns on her arm, sending shivers up her spine. A soft chuckle escaped her lips as she rolled her eyes at his cheesy remark, but the blush on her cheeks betrayed her delight. "Always the flatterer, aren't you?" she teased. "Only when it's the truth," he countered, pressing another kiss to her temple. His tone was sincere, his gaze intense, and for a moment, all banter ceased. The only sounds were the soft rustle of their breaths and the distant booms of the fireworks. They watched in silence as the sky erupted in a multitude of colors, their bodies swaying in tandem with the rhythm of the night. Koushin's thumb gently rubbed circles on her hand, the soft touch only intensifying the magic of the moment. As the fireworks reached their climax, a stunning display of golden light burst across the sky, illuminating their faces. Koushin watched as Ino's eyes widened with awe, her face glowing with the reflected light. Koushin's breath hitched slightly, seeing the beauty of the fireworks reflected in Ino's eyes. The noise of the festival felt worlds away, replaced by the quiet crackling of the fireworks above, the whispering rustle of the river flowing nearby, and the rhythmic beating of his own heart. He gazed at her, his eyes a silent promise of every unspoken word. Ino turned her head to meet his gaze, her violet eyes twinkling like the night sky. A soft sigh escaped her lips as she read the emotion in his eyes, her own reflecting the same warmth. The sight of him, looking at her with such sincere adoration, caused her heart to flutter, a feeling as thrilling as the fireworks above. Without breaking eye contact, Koushin's hand shifted from her arm to her face. His thumb gently stroked her cheek, the warmth of his hand seeping into her skin. The sparks from the fireworks above were nothing compared to the ones igniting between them. His other hand released hers to rest on her waist, drawing her closer to him, their bodies fitting together as if they were two pieces of the same puzzle. Her eyes flicked down to his lips for a moment, then back up to meet his gaze. He mirrored her actions, his gaze lingering on her lips before meeting her eyes again. They stayed like that for a long, silent moment, caught in the space between what was and what could be, a silent agreement passing between them. As the grand finale of the firework display lit the sky, bathing them in a kaleidoscope of colors, Koushin took a deep breath and closed the distance between them. His lips brushed against hers in a whisper-soft kiss, slow and deliberate. He kissed her like a man savoring every moment, every touch, every taste. Ino melted into him, her hand coming up to rest on his cheek. The warmth of his skin under her fingers sent a shiver down her spine, echoing in the pit of her stomach. She kissed him back with an intensity that matched his, their lips moving in a slow dance, telling a story of unspoken feelings and shared moments. Koushin pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, a gentle assertion of his feelings. His heart pounded in his chest like a drum, matching the rhythm of the fireworks booming overhead. Koushin's heart hammered in his chest, the taste of cotton candy still fresh on his lips. The kiss started softly, a tentative exploration that grew more confident with each passing second. His hand slipped from her waist to the small of her back, pulling her closer, his hold protective and assuring. Her hand on his cheek was warm and grounding, her touch as electrifying as the sparks flying above them. His other hand moved from her cheek to tangle in her hair, gently cradling the back of her head. His fingers skimmed along the soft tresses, the silky strands slipping through his fingers like fine threads of silk. He gently nudged her closer, their bodies now pressed against each other, two entities merged into one under the night sky. The taste of her lips was intoxicating, a vibrant mix of cherry tomatoes and strawberries, a perfect blend of sweet and tangy that made his senses tingle. Every brush of her lips against his was like a starburst in his mouth, an explosion of flavors that left him yearning for more. Her mouth moved in sync with his, their breaths mingling, their pulses pounding in a harmonious rhythm. Her hand slid down from his cheek to rest on his chest, her fingers splaying against his yukata. She could feel his heart pounding beneath her touch, a living testament to the intensity of the emotions swirling between them. Her touch was as light as a feather, but it grounded him, anchored him in the overwhelming surge of emotion that threatened to carry him away. Ino responded in kind, her mouth opening slightly, allowing him deeper access. Her grip on his yukata tightened, pulling him even closer, her body arching slightly against his. The fireworks overhead were forgotten as they lost themselves in each other, their world reduced to the space they shared, to the taste of their lips, to the sound of their shared breaths. Koushin savored the taste of her, his tongue sweeping across her lower lip, drawing a soft sigh from her. The noise sent a thrill through him, his hand tightening in her hair, his fingers brushing against her scalp. The world outside their kiss seemed to fade away, the only real thing being the woman in his arms and the electric connection between them. Gradually, the intensity of the kiss began to wane, the frenzied exploration giving way to a tender exchange. He pulled back slightly, but only enough to look at her, his hands still tangled in her hair, their breaths intermingling. His gaze was filled with a silent promise, a declaration of feelings left unspoken. His thumb stroked her cheek gently, a silent reassurance as they breathed each other in. Ino looked back at him, her eyes holding a soft glow in the dim light, her lips slightly swollen from their heated exchange. Her hand slid up from his chest to rest on his shoulder, her fingers idly playing with the collar of his yukata. She was silent, the look in her eyes saying more than words ever could. They leaned their foreheads together, the intimacy of the moment wrapping them in a cocoon of shared affection. The world around them seemed to slow down, the bustle of the festival muted to a quiet hum. Their breaths synced, their hearts beating in rhythm, their bodies still tingling from their shared kiss. Above them, the grand finale of the fireworks display burst into the sky, a breathtaking spectacle of colors and light. The golden light painted their faces, the shadows dancing across their features. They watched the spectacle, their gaze never straying from each other's eyes. They were completely lost in each other, the fireworks merely a backdrop to their silent conversation. Chapter 130, Disgusting Lovebirds. Several months had passed since that unforgettable night at the festival, and now Koushin found himself lounging on the roof of the Hokage building with Naruto and Hinata. The trio lay sprawled on their backs, idly watching the slow dance of the clouds above them, each lost in their own thoughts. Naruto's hand found Hinata's, their fingers intertwining in a gentle grasp. His thumb traced comforting circles over her knuckles, a small smile playing on his lips. Hinata's cheeks bloomed a soft pink, her eyes shining with unspoken love. The scene was so sickeningly sweet that it almost made Koushin want to gag, almost. "Okay, lovebirds," Koushin teased, rolling his eyes at their antics. "I didn't come up here to third wheel. You two need to tone down the affection, you're going to make me sick." Naruto chuckled, squeezing Hinata's hand a little tighter. "Jealous, Koushin? Wishing Ino was here?" His words were teasing, but the genuine concern underlying his tone softened the jab. A pang of longing shot through Koushin at the mention of Ino. She was on a mission with her team, and though he knew she was more than capable of handling herself, he couldn't help but miss her. His mind drifted to a vague memory, a temple, a monk. Was it something important? He shrugged the thought away. If he couldn't remember the specifics, it probably wasn't worth worrying about. His gaze shifted back to Naruto and Hinata, who were now whispering sweet nothings to each other. With a dramatic sigh, he sat up, interrupting their intimate bubble. "All right, that's it. I'm officially banning public displays of affection while I'm present. You're making my teeth ache with all this sweetness," he grumbled, but the good-natured twinkle in his eyes took any sting out of his words. With a smirk on his face, Naruto quipped, "You and Ino do it all the time, everywhere." His words echoed across the rooftop, ricocheting off the corners of the Hokage building, each syllable punctuated with a distinct undertone of mischief. Hinata, ever the observer, quietly concurred, her lilac eyes sparkling with quiet amusement as she bobbed her head in agreement. "That's true, Koushin." Koushin's eyes widened at their audacity, his jaw dropping in a rare display of stunned silence. Regaining his composure, he exclaimed, scandalized, "I beg your pardon. My pumpkin and I, we are not disgusting. We are sweet. We awaken love in people. We spread peace, serenity, happiness." He couldn't help but emphasize each sentiment with an indignant wave of his hand, each phrase growing louder and more indignant. How dare you compare what you have to me?" However, as he carried on his impassioned defense, Naruto and Hinata began to rise, exchanging knowing glances and shared smirks. Koushin's eyes followed their movements, his rant abruptly trailing off as realization dawned. "Where are you going?" "Stay and listen, damn you," he implored, his words hanging heavy in the air. His eyes widened in surprise as they continued to retreat, seemingly immune to his plea. It was a rare sight for Koushin, who was often the center of attention. His gaze flickered between the two, disbelief painting his features. "We are a team, damn it!" But his protest fell on deaf ears. Naruto and Hinata left the roof, their intertwined hands a gentle reminder of their shared love, leaving Koushin alone under the expansive Konoha sky. His shoulders slumped in defeat, a sigh of exasperation escaping his lips. For a moment, he lay there alone, staring blankly at the distant clouds, the teasing words of his friends echoing in his mind. He was no stranger to their playful banter, often the one initiating it. But today, it struck a different chord, bringing a wave of longing that swept over him like a gentle tide, leaving him yearning for Ino's comforting presence. Staring blankly at the Konoha sky, Koushin couldn't help but roll his eyes at his friend's audacity, a hint of amusement creeping into his gaze. Slowly, he pushed himself up from his sprawled position, the solid texture of the Hokage building's roof feeling cool against his palms. "What should I do now?" he murmured to himself, scratching his head idly as he glanced around the now vacant rooftop. Those two went God knows where. A thoughtful frown lined his features as he pondered his next steps, an idea quickly taking root in his mind. A smirk tugged at his lips as he muttered, "I guess I'll create another Rasengan variation. Rasen Galaxy, maybe? No, that's too flashy. How about Rasen Shuriken?" He chuckled, almost able to visualize Naruto's incredulous expression at the sight of a new Rasengan variant. But just as quickly as the humor had washed over him, a wave of realization replaced it. His eyes widened in a rare display of shock as he came to a silent revelation. It's time for Naruto to invent Rasen Shuriken if the events follow the anime timeline. That means... His heart clenched uncomfortably at the thought of Ino, away on her mission with her team. They would have encountered Hidan and Kakuzu in the normal course of events, a prospect that sent a shiver of fear coursing through his veins. Koushin's gaze darkened at the memory of the grinning Akatsuki member he defeated months prior. Hidan was no longer a concern, but his partner, Kakuzu, was still a looming threat. The Fire Temple. The realization struck him like a punch, a sense of unease pooling in the pit of his stomach. The Fire Temple had been attacked by Kakuzu in the past, and with Hidan out of the picture, it was likely that the threads of fate were still intertwined. Asuma and his team, including Ino, could still be in danger. "I need to find Ino," he decided, determination solidifying within him. Yet, amid the nostalgia and the absence of Ino, a hint of amusement sparked in his eyes. He couldn't help but chuckle at the sheer audacity of Naruto and Hinata, finding humor even in his moment of indignation. "Damn those two!" he mumbled, shaking his head with a light-hearted chuckle. Chapter 131, The Blitzing Lightning. Staring blankly at the Konoha sky, Koushin couldn't help but roll his eyes at his friend's audacity, a hint of amusement creeping into his gaze. Slowly, he pushed himself up from his sprawled position, the solid texture of the Hokage building's roof feeling cool against his palms. "What should I do now?" he murmured to himself, scratching his head idly as he glanced around the now vacant rooftop. Those two went God knows where. A thoughtful frown lined his features as he pondered his next steps, an idea quickly taking root in his mind. A smirk tugged at his lips as he muttered, "I guess I'll create another Rasengan variation. Rasen Galaxy, maybe? No, that's too flashy. How about Rasen Shuriken?" He chuckled, almost able to visualize Naruto's incredulous expression at the sight of a new Rasengan variant. But just as quickly as the humor had washed over him, a wave of realization replaced it. His eyes widened in a rare display of shock as he came to a silent revelation. It's time for Naruto to invent Rasen Shuriken if the events follow the anime timeline. That means... His heart clenched uncomfortably at the thought of Ino, away on her mission with her team. They would have encountered Hidan and Kakuzu in the normal course of events, a prospect that sent a shiver of fear coursing through his veins. Koushin's gaze darkened at the memory of the grinning Akatsuki member he defeated months prior. Hidan was no longer a concern, but his partner, Kakuzu, was still a looming threat. The Fire Temple. The realization struck him like a punch, a sense of unease pooling in the pit of his stomach. The Fire Temple had been attacked by Kakuzu in the past, and with Hidan out of the picture, his partner is most likely Orochimaru. Asuma and his team, including Ino, could still be in danger. "I need to find Ino," he decided, determination solidifying within him. In the Hokage's room, Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, sat behind her imposing desk, the weight of the village's responsibilities etched into her stern expression. Across from her was Kakashi, his hands gently spreading scrolls of parchment across the polished wood surface. Reports from different parts of the village, updates on security, missions, and general affairs, their mundane yet critical content soaking up the quiet stillness of the room. Karin, Tsunade's student, stood nearby, her eyes skimming over the contents of an open scroll in her hands. Sakura, another of Tsunade's apprentices, leaned against a nearby wall, a furrowed brow showing the strain of the intense concentration as she listened to the conversations. The room was permeated with an air of dedicated focus, a cocoon of calm that was abruptly shattered when an unseen wave of chakra vibrated through the village. The building seemed to shake under its force, the scrolls on the desk fluttering and shifting like disturbed birds. Karin's body stiffened, her crimson eyes widening in alarm. Her unique sensory abilities making her the first to react to the powerful chakra pulse. So angry, so devastated, so protective, so loving, she murmured, her voice wavering as she attempted to decipher the complex web of emotions tied to the chakra. What are these emotions? How can they appear in the same person? Before anyone could reply, the wave of chakra intensified, a tangible, electric presence that sent ripples of alarm through even the non-sensors in the room. The once steady air was now pulsating with a sense of dread and urgency that urged the occupants to action. The occupants of the room, Tsunade, Kakashi, Sakura, and Karin, all rushed to the windows simultaneously. They stared in shared shock as they observed a streak of lightning, pulsating with raw power, tearing through the sky, cleaving the heavens as it surged in a specific direction. Kakashi, his usual nonchalance replaced by a grimace, was the first to break the silence. "Koushin," he muttered, the name escaping his lips in a grim whisper. His intuition as a seasoned shinobi recognizing the unique signature of his student's chakra. Tsunade was next to speak, her voice laden with concern and anticipation. "Something's got him riled up," she said, her gaze riveted to the dazzling display of raw power. "We have to find out what's going on." No sooner had Tsunade's words faded, a gentle gust of wind drifted through the room, ushering in a messenger hawk. The bird landed delicately on the window ledge, a scroll bound with Team 10's insignia clenched tightly in its beak. Tsunade moved quickly, her hand stretching out to accept the message from the hawk. Unfurling the scroll, her gaze flitted over the hastily penned message, her eyebrows knitting together in consternation. Team 10 has encountered Kakuzu and Orochimaru. They need backup, Tsunade declared, the grave nature of the situation evident in her voice. The room descended into silence as the occupants absorbed the news, the gravity of the situation pressing heavily on their shoulders. The dangerous combination of the Akatsuki member and the rogue Konoha ninja was a formidable threat, one that Team 10 might not withstand on their own. But how did Koushin know about this? Tsunade mused aloud, her eyes narrowing in thought. Koushin's recent surge of chakra and his direction of departure now made chilling sense. Kakashi's gaze snapped to Tsunade, his relaxed demeanor replaced with resolute determination. No time to ponder that now, Lady Tsunade. We need to mobilize. Tsunade nodded, her sharp gaze meeting Kakashi's. Kakashi, take Naruto and Hinata and go. Provide them with backup. I will follow with Guy. Understood, Kakashi replied, already turning to leave. His gaze lingered on Sakura, offering her a nod of reassurance before disappearing in a puff of smoke. Tsunade turned to Sakura, her eyes serious. Sakura, stay here and coordinate the village's defenses. Keep an eye out for any additional threats. Sakura nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. Yes, Tsunade-sama. Chapter 132, Dragon Lady. At the same time, Koushin was in a full sprint, moving at a speed that blurred his surroundings into indistinguishable streaks of color. His form was surrounded by an aura of crackling lightning, a testament to the immense chakra he had unleashed. His mind was fixed on one destination, the bounty collection spot, a location burned into his memory from countless hours spent immersed in the Naruto series. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing his mounting concern. He was no stranger to danger, to the thrill of a fight, or the bitter tang of fear, but this was different. This was Ino, and the very idea of her facing such powerful adversaries as Kakuzu and Orochimaru, it was enough to stir a rage within him that was as wild as it was focused. I swear, he muttered to himself, each word punctuated by the rhythmic pounding of his feet against the ground. If you've laid even a finger on her, you'll learn the true meaning of suffering. His voice was low, a dangerous growl that promised retribution. His thoughts spun around the hope that he would reach the collection spot in time. If he was too late, his only remaining chance would be for Ino to use his blood to summon him, but he doubted she would use it once again, especially against Orochimaru. The rush of wind against his skin was almost a physical barrier, resisting his desperate dash towards his destination. But Koushin was undeterred. His eyes were sharp, the world beyond his path rendered insignificant by his singular goal. The surge of emotion was strong, twisting in his gut like a physical entity. He was angry, furious. But it wasn't an explosive rage that clouded his mind and consumed his reason. It was cold, calculated anger that gave him a deadly focus. Each burst of speed, each spark of electricity dancing over his skin was a testament to his resolve. There was no space for despair in his heart, no room for weakness or doubt. Despair would imply that he'd lost hope, and he was far from giving up. He had faith in Ino, in her strength and resilience, and he had faith in himself. Koushin knew he would reach her in time. He had to. Suddenly, a dark silhouette appeared on the horizon, a blot against the bright sky. The bounty collection spot. Koushin's heart pounded harder in his chest as he pushed himself to move even faster, his lightning chakra cloak illuminating his path. The closer he got, the more he could make out the destruction that marred the usually quiet area. Trees were uprooted, the ground torn up as if by wild beasts. And there, in the center of the devastation, was Team 10. A massive figure dominated the horizon, drawing Koushin's attention as he approached. The sight of the dragon, suspended in the air, brought both relief and concern. He knew the creature all too well, Saratar, an old adversary from the world of oblivion. He had slain it, and then altered its remains to create a formidable weapon for Ino to use with her unique technique. If the dragon was present, it meant the enemy they faced was indeed a formidable one. Koushin admired the evolution of Ino's unique jutsu, which expanded upon her inherent mind transfer ability. By connecting her consciousness to the deceased body, she took control of its movements, effectively turning it into a living weapon. Ino had pushed the limits of the jutsu to master the necro-puppeteer technique, controlling the dragon as if it were an extension of her own body. However, he knew that the technique was not without its drawbacks, the mental strain, the chakra drain, the vulnerability of Ino's own body. These were all risks that Ino bravely shouldered. Luckily, Koushin altered all the bodies in a way so she can hide within the corpses. Koushin's eyes narrowed as they fell upon two gigantic figures standing resolute against Orochimaru's glistening form. One of them, a colossal creature covered in coarse, icy white fur, towered over most shinobi, its broad shoulders and muscular limbs imbued with a brute strength. Two curved horns arched upward from its monstrous head, with eyes gleaming with an eerie blue intelligence. Next to the icy behemoth, a minotaur lord held ground, its humanoid form cloaked in thick, brown fur, crowned by a set of massive, twisted horns. The creature's muscled form was a testament to its power, its beastly face twisted into a snarl of defiance as it challenged Orochimaru. Neither creature was natural to the Naruto world, their forms and essence bearing the marks of an Elder Scroll realm, yet their fierce and terrifying presence was tangible and real. They stood in perfect harmony, their movements synchronized under the shadow that writhed beneath them, a testament to Shikamaru's enhanced shadow control jutsu. Shikamaru himself was some distance away, his face set in a mask of intense concentration as he manipulated the shadows beneath the two colossal figures. His jutsu had evolved into a complex art of necromancy, a testament to his intellectual prowess and his determination to protect his comrades. Facing the two creatures was Orochimaru, a sinister smile playing on his lips. His new sage body, a body borrowed from Yugo, pulsated with an unsettling aura of strength. He clashed against the two giants without faltering, his form slithering and dodging with an unnatural agility, occasionally shooting off a powerful jutsu to keep Ino's dragon form at bay. Further away, the battle between Choji and Kakuzu was just as intense. Choji, channeling yang chakra into his muscles and bones, had transformed into a form denser and tougher than his normal self, a feat possible thanks to his new jutsu, yang release, muscle and bone enhancement. The resulting physique wasn't excessively large, but it radiated an undeniable power. Choji's form was reminiscent of an impenetrable fortress, his muscles bulging and bones reinforced to withstand the relentless onslaught of attacks from the Edo Tensei-revived Kakuzu. The glint of Asuma's blade occasionally caught the sunlight as he assisted Choji, their combined forces holding back the Akatsuki member. Chapter 133, Just Die Old Corpse. Observing the scene from afar, Koushin let out a low whistle, impressed despite the grim circumstances. "Quite the party I've missed," he muttered to himself. His gaze fell on Ino, or rather, the dragon under her control. Saratar, the dragon, was a massive creature of imposing scale and power. Its greenish-blue scales shimmered under the sunlight, its enormous wings sweeping across the sky with devastating force. Its vacant eyes only served to underline the sheer mastery of Ino's necro-puppeteer technique. Impressive as always, Ino, he thought to himself. His respect for Ino and her technique had only grown since he had provided her with the weaponized corpses. The grim situation was temporarily alleviated by an ironic thought. At least she can hide within the creatures she controls. Convenient considering the size of the enemies we're dealing with. His lips twitched in a brief smile at the thought, his respect for his comrade's ingenuity shining through. Shaking off the levity, Koushin focused on the battle at hand. His voice, serious but filled with confidence, echoed in his mind as he murmured, "Time to join the fun." Tearing through the sky at an almost incomprehensible speed, Koushin wove around the devastating spells and explosions that littered the battlefield. His form was a flash of light, a streak of electricity dancing amidst the chaos. So swift was his movement that the occupants of the battlefield could hardly register his existence. A heartbeat later, he was standing next to Kakuzu. Only Orochimaru, his Mangekyo Sharingan ablaze, managed to follow Koushin's movement. Even then, he was startled by the sheer velocity of the newcomer. Behind his facade of smug indifference, shock seeped into his eyes. As hard as he strained to keep up with Koushin's speed, even he was unsure if he could react in time should Koushin choose to attack him. His sage body would instinctively defend, but there was a real possibility that Koushin could land a punch on him before that. The deceptively calm air around Koushin hummed with static, the raw electricity of his chakra crackling around him like a tempest contained. His hand swept out, tracing lines of pure lightning in the air. His movements were swift and elegant, like an artist creating an intricate masterpiece. The ceiling sign he drew shimmered with a pulsating light before landing on Kakuzu's body. The energy sizzled, the symbols sinking into the Akatsuki member's form as Koushin's chakra coursed into him. Raijin's calligraphy, Koushin murmured, his voice soft amidst the thunderous roars of the battlefield. The technique he had invented for Kakashi and Shin was being put to good use, a fusion of Kenjutsu, Fuinjutsu, and lightning release. The precision of his swordsmanship combined with the complexity of the sealing formula resulted in a stunning display of chakra control. The crackle of lightning release chakra coursed along the lines he had drawn, lighting them up like a beautiful, deadly sketch. Kakuzu, caught off guard, barely had time to process the situation before the formula sprung to life. His body began to convulse, his movements slowing as the sealing jutsu kicked in. Unable to resist, he could only watch as his body began to seal itself from the inside, his movements growing more sluggish by the second. The battlefield fell silent for a moment as the shinobi took in the sight of the Akatsuki member being bound by Koushin's technique. Even Orochimaru couldn't help but watch in stunned silence, his serpentine eyes wide with a mix of astonishment and curiosity. The smile on his face, usually brimming with sadistic delight, faded, replaced by a thin line of contemplation. "That's impressive," Orochimaru admitted, his tone filled with reluctant admiration. "Your speed, that sealing jutsu. You certainly didn't fail my expectations, Koushin-kun." The arrival of Koushin on the battlefield was like the sudden strike of lightning, his presence a welcome relief to his beleaguered comrades. Orochimaru's eyes widened in recognition, his voice, though grudgingly, admiring Koushin's techniques. Yet, it was not Orochimaru's reaction that mattered most to the newcomers, it was the reactions of his teammates, their relief palpable even amidst the chaos. No sooner had Koushin neutralized Kakuzu, Ino was the first to react, shifting the giant dragon under her control. Saratar, the beast of otherworldly scale and power, landed heavily next to Koushin, the ground trembling beneath its immense weight. The dragon turned its massive head towards Koushin, its empty eyes seeming to brim with a familiar spirit. Its mouth opened, revealing a row of serrated teeth as it bellowed, "Why did you come?" Koushin couldn't help but smile at the fierce creature, his voice carrying over the cacophony of the battlefield. "Well, I couldn't just ignore it when I felt my pumpkin was in distress, could I?" he responded, his tone light despite the intense situation. An ethereal blush appeared to wash over the dragon, the air around it shimmering in an uncanny fashion. It was an amusing sight, a stark contrast to the terrifying display of power the creature had shown just moments ago. The response was so much like Ino that for a moment Koushin forgot he was talking to a dragon, not the vivacious Kunoichi herself. It served as a stark reminder of her impressive control over her technique, her spirit so seamlessly integrated into the creatures she manipulated. As the dragon retreated, Shikamaru arrived, riding atop the back of the Minotaur Lord, his face set in an intense focus as he manipulated the colossal creature. As he neared Koushin, the Minotaur Lord slowed, eventually coming to a halt beside him. Shikamaru swung down from the creature's back with a graceful agility, landing firmly on his feet next to Koushin. His face, usually so calm and collected, held a hint of relief, his eyes conveying his gratitude. "Koushin," he acknowledged, his voice carrying a sense of appreciation that transcended words. His eyes flicked over the battlefield, his mind already strategizing their next moves. Choji was transformed, his muscles enhanced and bones densified through his newly mastered jutsu. Despite the visible strain of the fight against Kakuzu, there was a steadfast determination in his eyes, a resolve that was as unyielding as his fortified body. Asuma nodded towards Koushin in acknowledgement, his voice carrying a rare hint of relief. "Good to have you here, Koushin," he said, his tone echoing his gratitude. Choji, too, managed a brief nod, his gaze not leaving now sealed Kakuzu, his struggles died down due to Koushin's sealing jutsu. "Thanks for the backup," he rumbled, his voice carrying a hint of exhaustion that belied his imposing appearance. Chapter 134, One-on-One with Orochimaru. "Orochimaru-san, always a pleasure," Koushin addressed the snake Sannin with a slight bow of his head. His tone was respectful, yet there was a quiet confidence in his voice that held a promise of a challenge. Orochimaru turned his serpentine gaze towards Koushin, his yellow eyes flickering with interest. Koushin, he replied, the edges of his mouth curling into a faint smile. Since the years ago I saw you in Chunin exam, I knew you were a unique individual. You never ceased to surprise me. Koushin chuckled at that, his fingers cracked with static electricity. Well, thank you, Orochimaru-san, he replied, the hint of a smile playing on his lips. But can I ask you to take your hands, or rather claws, from my pumpkin and her friends, please? Orochimaru let out a dry laugh, his pale face lighting up with amusement. Sure, I can do that, he said, amusement dancing in his eyes. But I want to battle you one-on-one first. From her dragon form, Ino let out a sharp protest. Koushin, you can't possibly. But Koushin cut her off with a raised hand, his expression resolute. Ino, Shikamaru, Choji, Asuma, he addressed his teammates, step back. I've got this. There was a moment of silence, then Shikamaru sighed, a nod of approval gracing his usually impassive face. All right, Koushin, he conceded, his voice firm yet laced with concern. Ino, from her dragon form, hesitated, her apprehension clear. But eventually, she gave in to Koushin's insistence. Please be careful, Koushin, she said, the dragon's massive head inclining in a silent agreement. Always am, Koushin responded, a small, reassuring smile on his face. He then turned to face Orochimaru fully, his eyes reflecting his determination. Well then, Orochimaru-san. Shall we begin? The battlefield fell into an uneasy silence as the two shinobi squared off, their intense gazes locked on each other. Even in the face of such a formidable adversary, Koushin's demeanor remained calm and composed. His voice, when he spoke, was steady, reflecting his confidence. Whenever you're ready, Orochimaru-san. As the two warriors stood facing each other, the tension on the battlefield was palpable. The onlooking shinobi, their breaths held in anticipation, watched the impending clash with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. The initial silence was shattered by Orochimaru's laughter, a chilling sound that echoed ominously across the battlefield. You've always had a knack for lightening the mood, Koushin, he said, a wicked smile stretching across his face. I've always admired that about you. Koushin merely shrugged, his lips curving into a half-smile. One does try, he responded, not breaking his gaze from Orochimaru. His eyes, however, shimmered with an icy resolve. This was no time for levity. It was a moment of truth, a battle that would decide the fate of his friends and comrades. As Orochimaru's laughter died down, the battlefield fell silent once more. A hush fell over the arena, a stark contrast to the chaos of moments before. It was as though time itself had paused, waiting with bated breath for the epic clash that was to come. Oh, I forgot. Genjutsu doesn't work on you, Orochimaru chuckled as he ended the Kagami Mirage technique. His eyes held a glint of both annoyance and fascination, as if Koushin's immunity to Genjutsu was a puzzle that he couldn't quite solve. Details, Orochimaru-san. They do matter, Koushin quipped, his face serious, but his eyes held a playful twinkle. Besides, I much prefer the tangible things in life. Orochimaru laughed at that, a throaty sound that echoed around them. Well then, he said, the amusement clear in his voice, let's get physical, shall we? He moved then, with a speed that was nothing short of astonishing. His body weaved and undulated like a serpent, shooting towards Koushin with his fingers extended, razor-sharp claws glinting menacingly. Lightning erupted around Koushin, bright arcs of pure chakra crackling and fizzling in the air around him as he countered Orochimaru's strike. His speed picked up as he dodged and weaved around the Sannin, the space around them buzzing with the static electricity of his chakra. As they danced around each other, Koushin deftly threw a volley of shurikens and kunai at Orochimaru, making the snake Sannin swerve and slither in a frenzy to avoid the projectiles. Koushin's hand flashed, his fingers gripping a shuriken tightly as he deflected Orochimaru's rushing attack. His other hand pulled back, forming a sequence of hand signs at lightning speed. Lightning release, thunderbolt, he called out, lightning gathering around his hand before shooting towards Orochimaru in a bright arc of raw energy. Orochimaru twisted his body, avoiding the thunderbolt by mere inches. His smirk widened as he retaliated, his hands swiftly forming a sequence of signs. Earth Release, Earth Dragon Bullet. The ground around them trembled as a massive dragon made from earth and mud emerged, its open mouth spewing a torrent of mud bullets towards Koushin. Koushin moved in a blur, his lightning chakra cloak shimmering and sparking as he dodged the mud bullets with an incredible speed. His hand flashed, pulling out a kunai that glowed with his lightning chakra. He flung it at the earth dragon, the kunai cutting through the air like a bolt of lightning. There was a thunderous boom as the kunai collided with the dragon, causing it to explode into chunks of mud and earth. Orochimaru's eyes widened in surprise, the smirk on his face momentarily fading. He quickly recovered, his smirk turning into a chuckle. Impressive, he acknowledged, but can you keep up with this? He swiftly formed another sequence of hand signs. Wind Release, Great Breakthrough. A fierce gale erupted from Orochimaru's mouth, the wind whipping up dust and debris, creating a mini tornado that tore towards Koushin. Oh, I have a great jutsu for this one. Koushin grinned, his hands deftly moving through the hand signs. Fire Release was superior to wind, Fire Release, Reverse Blaze. His voice echoed through the dust-churned air. His hands released a tide of flame that met Orochimaru's wind head-on. Instead of being extinguished, the fire roared to life, riding on the wind, becoming stronger with each passing second. The blaze surged forward, consuming everything in its path, a fiery testament to Koushin's control over his chakra. Chapter 135, The One Pulling the Strings. Orochimaru's eyes narrowed as he witnessed Koushin's counter, the flames dancing in his cold, calculating gaze. He couldn't help but chuckle, the sound like the hiss of a serpent in the heated air. You are full of surprises, Koushin, he admitted, his voice carrying a hint of respect. Just trying to keep things interesting, Koushin replied, his voice steady despite the energy he was expending. His hands were already forming another sequence of hand signs, prepared for Orochimaru's inevitable retaliation. Orochimaru didn't disappoint. Water Release, Water Dragon Bullet Technique, he announced, his voice eerily calm amidst the chaos of their battle. A massive dragon, composed entirely of water, formed in the air before him, its maw opening to release a high-pressure stream of water towards the approaching wall of flame. The water met fire, creating an explosive cloud of steam that filled the space between them. Orochimaru used the mist to his advantage, slipping into the thick fog. But Koushin was ready for his tricks. The corners of his mouth turned upwards into a smirk. You forget, Orochimaru-san, that I can sense you. Is that so? Orochimaru's voice echoed around him, the mist distorting the direction. Then let's put that to the test. Before the words even finished echoing, Orochimaru was in motion, his form slicing through the steam like a blade. His hands wielded a kunai, its edge glinting ominously in the filtered sunlight. Koushin reacted swiftly, pulling out his own weapon just in time to parry Orochimaru's strike. Their kunai clashed, sparks flying off from the impact. Then it was a dance, a deadly ballet of precision and speed. Koushin's every move was met with a matching one from Orochimaru, their weapons clashing, their footwork a blur of motion. The mist around them dissipated slowly, but neither of them seemed to notice, so focused were they on each other. As they locked eyes, Koushin felt the familiar tug of Jinjutsu on his senses. He was about to swat it away when he noticed something unusual about it. This one was not a forceful attack, but an invitation. It was as if Orochimaru was asking him to accept his assault. Intrigued and obliging, Koushin lowered his mental defenses, allowing the Jinjutsu to take hold. In the next moment, Koushin found himself in a stark white space. Across from him, Orochimaru sat upon a throne, grand and imposing, its backrest curling into the shape of an enormous cobra, poised to strike. The snake's scales were intricately carved, gleaming in an uncanny light. Its fangs, protruding menacingly, were inlaid with ivory, the tongue, a sliver of ruby. Orochimaru's eyes twinkled with amusement, a smug smirk playing upon his lips. To his slight annoyance, before Koushin was a low chair, almost diminutive compared to the grandeur of Orochimaru's throne. Rolling his eyes at Orochimaru's theatrics, Koushin focused his chakra. As he did, the once modest chair transformed, bursting into a grand spectacle. The chair had morphed into an impressive throne of its own, grander than Orochimaru's. It was fashioned in the form of a mighty dragon, its spine forming the backrest. It was as if the beast were rearing up, wings unfurled, with eyes of sparkling violet gems that mirrored Koushin's own. The scales of the dragon were a stunningly polished bronze, the wings studded with gemstones. The claws, which formed the base of the throne, were sculpted to perfection, seemingly ready to tear into the very fabric of the Genjutsu. At this sudden transformation, Orochimaru looked taken aback. His amusement was quickly replaced with surprise. He chuckled, the sound echoing in the wide expanse of their shared mindscape. Well now, this is interesting. But tell me, Koushin, how can you alter my Genjutsu? Koushin responded with a smile, relaxing into his dragon throne, his violet eyes never leaving Orochimaru's. Why, Orochimaru-san, I believe you've forgotten the basics. Orochimaru's smirk faltered a bit, replaced by a look of genuine curiosity. And what, pray tell, might that be? He asked, his gaze sharp. Koushin leaned back, folding his hands behind his head, a picture of utter ease. Well, you see, he started, his voice echoing around them, this might be your Genjutsu, but we are currently in my mind. As such, I have full authority here. I can do whatever the hell I want since I have the power to break this jutsu anytime I want. Orochimaru's eyes widened in realization, and then he laughed. It was a hearty, appreciative laugh, the sound rolling around them like thunder. Well, Koushin, he said once his laughter subsided, I must say, you are a rather intriguing opponent. So, Orochimaru-san, why are we here? Didn't invite me in to insult me, did you? Koushin asked, reclining comfortably in his dragon throne. Orochimaru chuckled, no, of course not, Koushin. I am here to talk. A grin spread across Koushin's face. And what, pray tell, would you like to discuss with someone as pitiful as myself? I'm just a regular shinobi after all. Orochimaru's face changed at Koushin's words. His smile became a serious, almost crazed grin. We both know you are far from ordinary, Koushin-kun. How did you manage to remove my soul piece from the curse mark I gave you? Or did you find a way to remove the curse mark entirely? This time it was Koushin's turn to be taken aback. He took a moment to gather his thoughts, his eyes narrowing as he regarded Orochimaru carefully. Didn't think you'd notice that, he admitted, the surprise clear in his voice. Did you truly believe I wouldn't? Orochimaru asked, the edges of his lips curling upwards in a cruel smirk. I can feel the presence of my own soul, especially when in close proximity. But from you, there is nothing. Koushin nodded in understanding but did not provide an answer. He watched Orochimaru, his violet eyes flickering with curiosity. Orochimaru watched him back, his smirk never wavering. Regardless of how you did it, that's not why I am here, Orochimaru continued, leaning back in his own snake throne. I have information for you, Koushin. Given your intelligence, I trust you'll know what to do with it. His expression turned serious, his gaze hard as he locked eyes with Koushin. The Akatsuki is not as it appears. The one pulling the strings is Itachi. Chapter 136, The Key Redhead. Koushin's eyes widened slightly at the revelation. He sat up straighter in his chair, his expression serious. Itachi? He questioned, a hint of disbelief in his tone. Are you certain? I am afraid so, Orochimaru's voice echoed in the stark white expanse of the Genjutsu, a chill seeping into his tone that contradicted his usual light-hearted demeanor. Until a few months ago, even I was under his command, unable to refuse any of his orders. Koushin's eyes widened, surprise clear in his violet gaze. Orochimaru's words echoed in his mind. He had known that his existence in this world would cause deviations from the original Naruto anime timeline. The fact that Orochimaru was still part of Akatsuki, for example, was a stark contrast to the narrative he was familiar with. Then there were the reanimated Akatsuki members. In the anime, Sasori, Deidara, and Kakuzu had lived their natural lives until they met their respective ends. Yet, in this world, they had chosen to be reanimated to enjoy eternal life. He knew his presence in this universe would inevitably lead to changes, but predicting the full extent of those alterations was impossible. The revelation of Itachi as the puppeteer behind Akatsuki, however, was a twist he hadn't anticipated. "Are you certain, Orochimaru-san?" he asked, his voice measured, hiding the surge of concern that welled up in him. "And how did you escape his control?" Koushin asked after a few moments of consideration. His eyes, still locked onto Orochimaru's, were filled with curiosity and intrigue. "That is for me to know, and for you to find out," Orochimaru answered, his smirk broadening into a full grin. His eyes danced with amusement, the snake-like pupils narrowing as he watched Koushin's reaction. For a moment, silence settled between them as Koushin processed the information. His mind raced, piecing together the implications of Orochimaru's revelations. Then, his gaze hardened, a spark of understanding flaring in his eyes. "Karin," he said simply, his tone flat. At the mention of her name, Orochimaru's smug grin faltered, replaced by a brief moment of shock. His eyes widened, his pupils contracting in surprise. The usually unflappable snake Sannin had been caught off guard. Koushin's smirk mirrored Orochimaru's earlier one. He leaned back in his throne, his eyes glittering with satisfaction. Seeing Orochimaru's shocked expression was a small victory in this mental chess game they were playing. Koushin tilted his head back, eyes half closed, as he considered Orochimaru's revelation. His thoughts spun, probing, assessing. Something wasn't quite adding up. To orchestrate the moves of a group like Akatsuki, simple genjutsu wouldn't suffice, no matter how proficient Itachi was in that domain. His eyebrows knitted together as he continued to ponder. Sasuke's eyes were safely tucked away in his inventory, an unseen precaution to protect the younger Uchiha's powerful Mangekyo Sharingan from falling into the wrong hands. That left Kodo Amatsukami, an incredibly potent genjutsu belonging to Shisui Uchiha. Itachi did have one of Shisui's eyes. Itachi then killed Danzo and effectively taking back Shisui's other eye, completing the set. Peculiarities of the Sharingan. The Sharingan was often called the Eye of Love and Hatred. It was awakened through intense emotions, generally spawned from experiencing loss or immense pain. The deeper the love, the greater the possibility for the eye to awaken. His gaze turned distant as he recalled Shisui and Itachi's close friendship. They had been best friends, closer than brothers. The loss of Shisui was a tragic event that had undoubtedly impacted Itachi deeply. It was no surprise that the incident had awakened Itachi's Mangekyo Sharingan. However, the theory of Itachi awakening his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan through Shisui's eyes was a bit harder to digest. The general notion was that awakening EMS required the transplanted eyes to be of a close family member. Yet, the essence of it was rooted not just in blood relations but the strong emotions carried by the bearer. Considering the depth of Itachi's relationship with Shisui, it wasn't entirely impossible. He might have been able to awaken his EMS through the love he held for Shisui, a bond so profound that it transcended the boundaries of blood. Shisui was not just Itachi's best friend, he was the embodiment of his love and admiration, a representation of the peace and camaraderie he sought. To Itachi, Shisui was the epitome of the Uchiha he wanted to be, the personification of the clan he had yearned to belong to. The hatred that came after his death was not for Shisui but for the circumstances that led to his demise. Koushin's gaze hardened as he reached a tentative conclusion. The idea was a bit radical, yet it made sense. If Itachi could replace the physical requirement with the depth of his emotional bond, he might indeed have awakened EMS with Shisui's eyes. And the Kodo Amatsukami? He wondered, the corners of his lips curling into a thoughtful frown. Shisui's strongest genjutsu was said to be the ultimate mind-controlling technique. If Itachi had access to it, then his influence over the Akatsuki seemed far more plausible. A startling notion, but the Uchiha were always full of surprises. Adamantine ceiling chains. Koushin began, his eyes remaining fixed on Orochimaru's serpentine gaze. Although Karin is not that proficient at it, when she used it on you, it suppressed whatever jutsu Itachi had planted. That's why you vacated the battlefield so abruptly that day. A slow clap echoed through the white expanse. Orochimaru was genuinely impressed, a sinister smile playing on his lips. Keen as always. Good observation. Can you also tell me what Itachi uses to control us? Koushin's eyes narrowed, his mind whirling. It was a trap, a cleverly set snare. He had the answer, but he couldn't afford to expose his extensive knowledge. He chose his words wisely, playing safe. A strong jinjutsu, probably something related to his Mangekyo abilities, he replied, his voice a low rumble. Orochimaru nodded in approval, his snake-like eyes glinting with amusement. You continue to impress, Koushin. Chapter 137, Never utter that name. Feeling a shift in the conversation, Koushin allowed a small grin to tug at the corners of his mouth. And now we get to the part where you pretend to want something in exchange for this information? Something that seems impossible but isn't your real goal. You want us to eliminate Itachi, don't you? That's why you're sharing this information with us. But you can't just say that, so you're going to ask for, either Karin or me, am I right? Orochimaru's eyes widened for a moment, before a wild grin spread across his face. You are too smart for your own good, Koushin-kun, he hissed, the hint of admiration lacing his tone was impossible to miss. A low, cold chuckle followed. Actually, I wanted to ask for Ino-cha. He was cut off abruptly as the once serene space around them seemed to distort, gripped by an unseen force. A potent killing intent unfurled, filling the expanse, saturating it with a torrent of unbridled rage. The pristine white void began to bleed, slowly morphing into a crimson maelstrom, reflecting Koushin's fury. The atmosphere turned thick and ominous, the sheer pressure of Koushin's anger making it difficult to breathe. Orochimaru found himself taken aback by this unexpected display of hostility, the sardonic smirk he wore vanishing into a look of subtle alarm. Despite his nonchalant demeanor, Orochimaru could feel the pressure. His gaze flickered, and for the briefest moment, uncertainty flickered in the depths of his golden eyes. Look at it, Orochimaru. Koushin's voice was eerily calm, betraying the storm that raged within him. This is my mind, and what you feel is my true emotions. If you dare to utter Ino's name in such a sentence again, all this wrath will rain down upon you. I suggest you choose your next words very carefully. There was an uncomfortable silence, the air heavy with tension. Orochimaru, despite his cunning and power, found himself at a loss for words. He had expected many reactions from Koushin, but this raw, powerful surge of emotions was not among them. Koushin's gaze never wavered. He was not threatening Orochimaru, he was promising him. It was clear to the sly snake that he had overstepped his boundaries. His eyes, usually filled with mischief and danger, held a different shine, respect, perhaps, or maybe understanding. Regardless, it was clear that he had learned something new about Koushin today. We are done here. Koushin's voice cut through the mounting tension like a blade. With a dismissive wave of his hand, the pristine white space shattered like glass, the intricate jinjutsu dissolving into thin air. They emerged once more in the battlefield, the aura of hostility dissipating with the disintegration of the illusionary realm. Koushin stood across from Orochimaru, his eyes cold, determination etched into his features. The worried gazes of Ino and others lingered on him, their attention torn between the tense standoff and the unexpected tranquility that had fallen over the battlefield. Let's go! Koushin's command was firm, leaving no room for protest. His companions glanced at Orochimaru, expecting a fight, a trap, or some form of resistance. But to their utter shock, the infamous Sannin merely watched them, a perplexed look replacing his usual sadistic grin. As they retreated, a quiet uncertainty hung over them. No one dared to break the silence until they had put a significant distance between themselves and Orochimaru. They couldn't shake off the feeling of unease, the unexpected withdrawal of Orochimaru too unnerving to be considered a victory. Halfway back to the village, they spotted a familiar group rushing towards them. Tsunade, Guy, Kakashi, Naruto, and Hinata appeared in their line of sight, their faces etched with worry. As they neared, they slowed their pace, relief washing over them upon spotting Koushin and the others. "You guys okay?" Tsunade was the first to break the silence, her authoritative voice echoing in the stillness of the night. She studied each of their faces, her sharp gaze taking in their state, reading the unspoken words in their silence. "We are," Koushin replied, his tone stoic, giving nothing away about the confrontation they had just endured. His hand moved in a swift, deliberate motion, casting forth a thin veil of lightning chakra. It flowed and twisted, delicate as silk, until it formed a dome around them. His chakra, imbued with the quintessence of Raijin's calligraphy, outlined intricate symbols and seals across the dome, creating a sight of spectacular beauty and complexity. The air inside the dome vibrated subtly, its soothing hum akin to the gentle strumming of a koto. As the dome of chakra manifested, expressions of awe registered on the faces of his allies, including the usually unreadable Kakashi. Even though Koushin had tutored him in Raijin's calligraphy over the past 3 years, the copy ninja had never seen such a unique and intricate use of the technique. Koushin looked around at their astonished faces and began to explain, "This dome serves as an isolation barrier. Nothing from inside can be observed or overheard from outside. It's a perfect safe haven for us to converse." His voice echoed softly within the dome, the seals glowing faintly with each word. Tsunade nodded, her gaze reflecting her trust in Koushin's abilities. "Now that we're secure," Koushin began, his tone carrying an edge of seriousness, "I need to share some critical information with all of you." He cast a glance at Ino, a silent reassurance before he started. "Our earlier encounter with Orochimaru was more than it seemed. He shared something about Itachi, the Uchiha, and Akatsuki." He paused, gauging the reactions. "Itachi, it seems, may possess the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. And he's the true puppeteer behind Akatsuki's actions." His words hung heavily in the silence that followed. Kakashi's eyes narrowed, processing the information, while Naruto wore an expression of disbelief. Hinata clutched Naruto's sleeve gently, a worried frown creasing her forehead. "What is eternal Mangekyo Sharingan?" Naruto broke the silence, a frown creasing his forehead. Koushin looked at Naruto, his gaze calm but serious. "According to Orochimaru, Mangekyo Sharingan is not the final stage. There is a stage above, known as Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan," Koushin began, his voice steady. "Awakening the Mangekyo Sharingan comes at a grave cost, that of severe emotional trauma, often involving the loss of someone very close to the user. However, using its power leads to blindness over time." Chapter 138, Revealing Some Secrets. The group listened, their faces etched with concentration as they absorbed the new information. The only way to prevent this eventual blindness is by obtaining another pair of Mangekyo Sharingan from a close relative and transplanting them into oneself. This leads to the awakening of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, Koushin continued, his gaze flickering over the group, ensuring they were following. "That's intense," Naruto murmured, running a hand through his spiky hair. Koushin nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, Naruto, it is. The Uchiha clan is a tragic one, full of strife and torment. In Itachi's case, Orochimaru suggested he might have used Shisui Uchiha's eyes," Koushin shared, the words felt heavy as they hung in the air. A silence settled over the group again, but Koushin pushed through it. Given their close bond, Itachi could theoretically replace the physical blood relation requirement with the depth of his emotional bond to Shisui. "Can that even work?" Kakashi asked, his usually calm eyes wide in surprise. "We don't know for sure, but the Sharingan isn't merely a product of blood. It is deeply tied to emotions, to the heart. So, it's not entirely impossible," Koushin explained. His gaze moved to Naruto. "Think about your Rasengan, Naruto. It's not just about spinning chakra, right? You also need a strong intent, a clear purpose. Naruto nodded, a faint smile forming on his face. I see. It's like the Rasengan is an extension of my will. Exactly. Similarly, the Sharingan, especially the Mangekyo and beyond, are intrinsically linked to the user's emotional state. It is not just the eyes that change, but the very soul of the Uchiha, Koushin elaborated, his tone echoing the gravity of the information he was revealing. The silence stretched on as the group digested the implications. Then, Io spoke, her voice shaking slightly, and you think Itachi is controlling Akatsuki with this Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan? It is a possibility, Koushin replied, locking eyes with Ino, his gaze softening. Orochimaru believes Itachi might be using a potent Jinjutsu. And how did Orochimaru reveal all this if Itachi is so powerful? Shouldn't he also be in control? Tsunade asked, her brows furrowed in doubt. Her question hung heavy in the air, echoing off the translucent dome. Koushin's gaze fell on her, his lips curling into a mild smile. Well, that is where Karin comes in. Karin? Naruto's voice was laced with worry as his eyes flickered between Koushin and Tsunade. What does she have to do with all this? Remember our fight against Orochimaru at the Tenchi Bridge? Koushin began, his tone steady. Lady Tsunade arrived with Karin, and chains materialized from Karin's body, ensnaring Orochimaru for a brief second. Nods of acknowledgement echoed his words, their expressions reflecting their recall of the tense encounter. Those chains, Koushin continued, were manifestations of Karin's adamantine sealing chains, a powerful technique that has the ability to suppress chakra. The strongest ones can even bind tailed beasts. Although Karin is not yet capable of that level of control, her chains were potent enough to provide Orochimaru a respite from Itachi's control. Shock registered on their faces as they absorbed the gravity of Koushin's revelation. Karin's ability was far more crucial than they had initially assumed. She was not only an empath capable of detecting emotional states but also a potential counter to the most potent Jinjutsu. Wait a minute, Guy finally broke his silence, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with a serious expression. Orochimaru divulged this willingly? Koushin chuckled lightly, not exactly, Guy. His reactions merely confirmed my deductions. Understanding flickered in Guy's eyes. So, you read him like an open book? Not quite, Koushin replied, the corners of his mouth tugging upwards into a smirk. More like I highlighted the parts he didn't want me to see. Their eyes widened at Koushin's revelation. His knack for understanding and manipulating situations was always admirable, but his handling of Orochimaru was something else entirely. It spoke volumes about his mental acuity and strategic aptitude. And how did Orochimaru reveal all this if Itachi is so powerful? Shouldn't he also be in control? Tsunade asked, her brows furrowed in doubt. Her question hung heavy in the air, echoing off the translucent dome. Koushin's gaze fell on her, his lips curling into a mild smile. Well, that is where Karin comes in. Karin? Naruto's voice was laced with worry as his eyes flickered between Koushin and Tsunade. What does she have to do with all this? Remember our fight against Orochimaru at the Tenchi Bridge? Koushin began, his tone steady. Lady Tsunade arrived with Karin, and chains materialized from Karin's body, ensnaring Orochimaru for a brief second. Nods of acknowledgement echoed his words, their expressions reflecting their recall of the tense encounter. Those chains, Koushin continued, were manifestations of Karin's adamantine sealing chains, a powerful technique that has the ability to suppress chakra. The strongest ones can even bind tailed beasts. Although Karin is not yet capable of that level of control, her chains were potent enough to provide Orochimaru a respite from Itachi's control. Shock registered on their faces as they absorbed the gravity of Koushin's revelation. Karin's ability was far more crucial than they had initially assumed. She was not only an empath capable of detecting emotional states but also a potential counter to the most potent Jinjutsu. Wait a minute, Guy finally broke his silence, his usual cheerful demeanor replaced with a serious expression. Orochimaru divulged this willingly? Koushin chuckled lightly, not exactly, guy. His reactions merely confirmed my deductions. Understanding flickered in Guy's eyes. So, you read him like an open book? Not quite, Koushin replied, the corners of his mouth tugging upwards into a smirk. More like I highlighted the parts he didn't want me to see. Their eyes widened at Koushin's revelation. His knack for understanding and manipulating situations was always admirable, but his handling of Orochimaru was something else entirely. It spoke volumes about his mental acuity and strategic aptitude. Still, why would Orochimaru reveal all this? Ino asked, her voice imbued with worry. She moved closer to Koushin, her delicate hand finding solace as it clung to his arm. Her wide, azure eyes mirrored her disquiet as they searched his face for answers. Have you signed any contract? Did he ask something in return? Chapter 139, Dragon Wifu. Koushin's gaze softened as he looked at her, a slight hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. His arm wrapped around her, pulling her close to his side as a comforting gesture. With the other hand, he reached up to tenderly caress her cheek before leaning in to plant a soft kiss there. Ino's cheeks flamed, embarrassment and surprise mingling in her expression. She hadn't expected such a public display of affection, especially not in the middle of a discussion so grave. Yet the familiar warmth of his touch and the tender kiss seemed to work magic on her, slowly allaying her fears. A soft chuckle escaped Koushin's lips as he watched her reaction, his eyes glinting with affectionate mischief. Ino, he began, do you remember our initial lessons in strategy? The abrupt change of topic seemed to catch her off guard, yet she nodded, her expression slowly shifting from flustered to thoughtful. Yes, she finally replied, her voice steady. You said that the key to victory often lies not in what is said but what is unsaid. Indeed, Koushin acknowledged, his gaze still locked with hers. And it was the unsaid that led me to see through Orochimaru's plan. I saw through his plan, Koushin continued, his gaze hardened as he once again addressed the group. His voice echoed through the silence, every syllable filled with resolute conviction. Orochimaru, in his own twisted way, tried to make a deal with us. Something he knew we'd refuse. Naruto's brows furrowed, his hand scratching his head in bewilderment. So, he wanted us to say no? In a manner of speaking, Koushin replied, his gaze momentarily flicking towards Naruto before focusing back on the group. He was going to ask something impossible, so we would just reject him and owe him one. Understanding dawned on Shikamaru's face. A ploy to create a debt under the guise of a favor. Classic trickster strategy, he mused, his gaze sharp and calculating. Asuma gave a short nod at Shikamaru's conclusion, his hand unconsciously going to the stubble on his chin. His thoughtful eyes watched as Koushin continued. But, Koushin said, his tone shifting to a more serious note. That wasn't his endgame. His real goal was to lead us to Itachi, possibly kill or injure him, then he would swoop in and most probably snatch his eyes. A collective gasp echoed around the dome, followed by a tense silence. The severity of Orochimaru's plot was not lost on any of them. The thought of the snake Sannin getting his hands on Itachi Sharingan sent a chill down their spines. Guy clenched his fists, the cheerfulness that usually clung to him like a second skin was nowhere in sight. So, we were to be the bait for his twisted fishing game, he ground out, the distaste evident in his voice. Koushin gave him a terse nod, his stern gaze softened a fraction as he looked at Ino who still clung to his arm. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, but since I saw through his ploy, we don't owe him anything. Ino's azure eyes widened in surprise, then relief washed over her face. Her grip on Koushin's arm relaxed slightly as she processed his words. Are we going to just follow his plan? Act like his puppets and go after Itachi? Asuma asked, his voice filled with indignation. The painful memory of his father's death at Orochimaru's hands flashed before his eyes, causing a tight knot of anger to form in his stomach. Tsunade, too, clenched her fists, her gaze hardening at Asuma's words. The betrayal by her former comrade was a wound that had never fully healed. Koushin turned to look at them, his expression thoughtful. We don't have a choice, he said, his voice carrying a weight that resonated with their shared pain. We were already enemies with Akatsuki. But that doesn't mean we should fall into Orochimaru's trap, Tsunade retorted, her voice heavy with frustration. Koushin tilted his head slightly, acknowledging her point. True, he conceded. But remember, Tsunade, we have the advantage of knowing his plan. Naruto's brow furrowed in confusion. How is that an advantage, Koushin-sensei? He asked, his voice ringing out in the silence that had settled over the group. Koushin smiled faintly at Naruto's innocent curiosity. Because knowledge gives us power, Naruto, he replied, his eyes holding a steady and comforting warmth. We can anticipate his moves, adapt our strategies. We're not his puppets. We'll be playing the game on our own terms. But the risk, Asuma began, only to be interrupted by Koushin. Is a part of every mission, Koushin finished for him, his voice steady and calm. We can't shy away from it. What we can do is prepare for it, be ready for every possibility. Guy, who had been silently listening, finally broke his silence. Koushin is right, he said, his usually vibrant demeanor replaced with a solemn intensity. We must remain steadfast in the face of adversity. That is the way of the shinobi. Let's return to the village for now, Koushin said, his stern gaze sweeping over the group. He raised his hand, and with a subtle movement, the translucent dome of lightning around them began to crumble, the shards falling around them like stardust, glinting in the dim light. Lady Tsunade, he began, turning to the Godame Hokage. His tone held a note of urgency, a sharp contrast to his earlier jests. We must inform the other villages as well. The more the fight, the easier it will be. Tsunade nodded, her gaze serious as she processed the information. I'll send out the messages immediately. Her gaze flitted to Naruto, a silent understanding passing between them. Once the seriousness was out of the picture, Koushin let out a sigh, his tension visibly dissipating. The corners of his lips curled into a small smile as he turned to Ino, his blue eyes sparkling with a playful gleam. Moving towards her with the speed of a lightning bolt, he wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into a warm embrace. Pumpkin, you are awesome. My wife is a dragon. Ino's cheeks flushed a deep red, her surprise evident in the wide eyes that met Koushin's playful ones. Who is your wife, idiot? She tried to sound stern, but her voice faltered slightly, her eyes betraying the affectionate smile that was threatening to surface. Chapter 140, Pride Leads to Death. Back in the village, Tsunade had just arrived at her office and slumped down onto her chair. She felt the weight of the day's revelations still hanging heavy over her. A sigh escaped her lips as she reached for a hidden bottle of sake within her desk, pouring herself a cup. Just as she was about to take a sip, she sensed a familiar presence by the window. Rolling her eyes, she set the cup down and swiveled in her chair to face the intruder. Isn't it a bit early to drink, Tsunade? Jiraiya asked, leaning casually against the window frame, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. It is never early for a drink, she retorted, her gaze frosty. She wasn't in the mood for his teasing. What do you want, Jiraiya? The Toad Sage feigned hurt, his hand clutching his heart dramatically. Is this how you treat an old friend? She snorted, her eyes sparkling with sarcasm. This is how I treat an annoyance. Now, say what you want to say. Jiraiya noted the cold edge to her voice and decided against any further jokes. He straightened, his playful demeanor fading. I have a lead on Akatsuki's leader, he announced, his tone somber. Tsunade looked at Jiraiya, amusement evident in her expression, despite the heavy news of the day. Oh, pray tell, what you know, she asked, placing her untouched cup of sake back on the desk. She leveled him with a stern gaze, her previous irritability replaced by a resolute determination. Jiraiya met her gaze squarely, the weight of his revelation sinking in. He straightened, letting go of the playful demeanor that usually cloaked him. I've been tailing them for quite some time now, he began, his gaze shifting towards the various scattered documents on her desk. And I've been able to trace a series of their activities across multiple countries. And? Tsunade's tone held an edge, her patience wearing thin. Rain Country, he finally announced, the two words resounding in the room with an almost ominous echo. I believe that's where their leader has been hiding. Those are old news, Jiraiya. Tsunade snorted, her eyes, still burdened with the day's revelations, held a glint of amusement. Itachi is the true leader of Akatsuki. He's using a powerful jinjutsu to control others. Jiraiya's eyebrows shot up, his normally composed expression giving way to surprise. What did you say? He asked, his voice louder than he intended. How can you possibly know all of this? Even I. Tsunade clicked her tongue, her stern gaze cutting through his surprise. While you were gallivanting after your childhood crush, we were gathering crucial information, she retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. The word stung, and Jiraiya frowned at her choice of phrasing. My pursuit of Orochimaru was not. Oh, save your explanations, Tsunade cut him off, her patience wearing thin. We have more pressing matters at hand. Koushin found out from Orochimaru himself. The mention of Koushin made Jiraiya's frown deepen. A twinge of envy flickered through his eyes before he could suppress it. And you believe him? He asked, his tone laced with an undertone of resentment. Tsunade looked at him, her brows furrowing as she picked up on his implications. I don't trust Orochimaru, but this information holds water. Jiraiya shook his head, his irritation flaring up. I'm not questioning Orochimaru's honesty, Tsunade. It's Koushin I'm skeptical about. How can he unearth something so crucial? He must be in league with Akatsuki. Tsunade's face contorted in fury at his insinuation. She stood abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor, her fists clenching. You dare question Koushin's loyalty? Her voice echoed in the room, laced with fury. The man who has done nothing but serve this village with honor? He saved your hide on the bridge against Orochimaru, and now you doubt his integrity? Is your ego so bruised, Jiraiya, that you'd stoop this low? Jiraiya flinched at her words, taken aback by the ferocity of her response. He looked at her, his lips parting slightly as he tried to formulate a retort. I am just saying. No, you're just sulking. Tsunade retorted, her icy gaze unwavering. Koushin's been nothing but forthright. He's risked his life for us, for this village. He's shown nothing but goodwill. And all you can do is question his honesty because he managed to find out something you couldn't? Grow up, Jiraiya. She took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Her fists unclenched, and she crossed her arms over her chest, her gaze still piercing him with indignation. Jiraiya looked at her, at a loss for words. He had never seen Tsunade so fiercely protective of someone. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the sharpness of her gaze made him falter. Tsunade sighed, her fury simmering down as she realized her outburst. Jiraiya, she began, her voice softer but still firm. I understand your concerns. But you must understand that this is not the time for petty jealousy or unfounded suspicions. We're dealing with an unprecedented situation. We need to trust each other, now more than ever. I'm telling you, Tsunade, there's something off about this whole thing, Jiraiya asserted, his typically jovial face stern and lined with determination. He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the wooden floor. I'll infiltrate the Rain Village. I'll unearth the truth myself. Tsunade, sitting opposite him, her normally bright eyes hardened with concern, frowned at his words. It's dangerous, she protested, her voice gruff yet tinged with the slightest edge of fear. You're gonna get yourself killed, Jiraiya. He smirked at her concern, a cocky confidence masking the pain in his heart. I'll survive, he retorted, I'll bet my life on it. Tsunade, her fury now ignited, waved her hand dismissively, her sake-filled cup nearly toppling over. Fine, go and do whatever you want. But just remember, Jiraiya, the Akatsuki is far more dangerous than you think. You'll die in vain if you rush headlong into this. Jiraiya froze at her words, taken aback by the seemingly uncaring tone that fell from her lips. Tsunade was a caring individual, but he had probably pushed her too far this time. That realization stung more than any wound he'd ever received in battle. "I'll show you, Tsunade," he responded, his voice laced with an unfamiliar hardness. "The truth is vastly different from what you believe." With a final, lingering look, he turned and walked away, his exit leaving a heavy silence in the room. Once he'd gone, Tsunade slumped back into her chair, the force of her emotions nearly knocking her sake from the table. She reached for the cup and downed the contents in one gulp, the liquid burning her throat but not dulling her worry. "This is the shinobi world," she muttered to the empty room. "Pride has no place here. It only leads to death." Chapter 141, Meeting. Inside a dank and dripping cave, the members of the Akatsuki were scattered throughout the gloom, the atmosphere crackling with tension. 9 formidable figures lurked within the darkness: Itachi, Pain, Konan, Obito, Kisame, Zetsu, Orochimaru, Kabuto, and the recent addition to the team, Gaara. Just moments prior, they had finished the laborious task of sealing the three-tailed beast, as well as the beasts inside the new members, Rashi and Utakana. Despite the odds, they had successfully gathered 4-tailed beasts. But success hadn't come without sacrifices and setbacks. Yujito had been rescued by Konoha's forces, resulting in Hidan's death and Kisame's temporary capture by Raikage, only to be later freed by Obito. Kakuzu had met his end at the hands of Koushin. "Never thought I'd miss the old geezer, Kakuzu," Kisame mused aloud, his voice echoing eerily off the cold stone walls. His shark-like eyes flickered with the reflection of the tiny flame in the middle of the cavern. Obito, mask obscuring his face, nodded silently. The void left by their fallen comrades weighed heavily on all of them. "We have the same enemies, Kisame. Our comrades' deaths are a necessary sacrifice." As if on cue, the room stilled, the only sound was the slow dripping of water from stalactites. Everyone's attention shifted towards the cloaked figure in the center of the cave. Kisame's sharp voice cut through the silence. "That brat, Koushin, gives us too much trouble." "Itachi-san," he began, turning his gaze to the enigmatic figure, "didn't you say you would speak to him? About his parents' murder, orchestrated by Danzo. Surely, that would sway him to our side?" Itachi, a commanding figure despite his youth, glanced at Kisame through the slits of his cloak. A calculating look danced across his eyes as he observed each member's reaction to Kisame's words. Itachi's leadership had a quiet strength to it. He didn't need to raise his voice to demand respect or attention. His mere presence commanded it. "HN," he hummed in response. It wasn't dismissive, rather, it indicated that he was contemplating Kisame's words. "I will speak to him soon," Itachi began, his voice steady, every word laced with purpose. "I needed to get him stronger before he could be useful to us. Now that he is a trusted person in Konoha, when he switches to our side, I can make better use of him." Across the room, Orochimaru's eyes gleamed in the dim light, a spark of mischief flaring before being swiftly extinguished, hidden behind an inscrutable facade. The snake Sannin knew better than to wear his intentions openly, but his interest in Itachi's statement was hardly surprising. After all, subterfuge and manipulation were his preferred tools. Just then, the eerie silence of the cave was broken by Zetsu's dark, ominous voice, echoing with an unsettling chill. "Toad Sannin is infiltrating the rain." The news hung in the air like a shroud, sending waves of tension through the room. Several members stiffened, eyes darting to one another as they mentally prepared for the potential repercussions of Jiraiya's infiltration. But despite the grave news, Itachi remained composed. His face was as serene as ever, the calm in the storm that was the Akatsuki's volatile existence. Rising to his feet, he looked over the members of his group. His piercing gaze fell on each member, a silent testament to his control. He didn't need to raise his voice, his mere presence commanded respect and obedience. "Go after Han and Fu," he ordered, his voice echoing in the cave. He paused, casting a calculating gaze across the room. "Leave Yujito, B, and Naruto alone for now. I will deal with them later." His words prompted immediate action. Kisame grunted in agreement, his sharp shark-like teeth bared in a savage grin, eager for the hunt. Konan merely nodded, her paper wings rustling as she prepared to take flight. Obito, however, hesitated. "Itachi-sama," he started, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. He was not one to question orders, yet the mention of Naruto, the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails, stirred a sense of unease within him. "Are you sure about leaving them be?" Itachi's gaze landed on Obito, and for a moment, silence ruled the cave. The tension hung heavily in the damp air, almost tangible. When he finally spoke, his voice held an edge of command, dismissing any doubt. "Yes, I am. We have more urgent matters to attend to." Obito inclined his head, his question answered, but the unease remained. However, he trusted Itachi. He was their leader, after all, and his word was law. Kabuto, who had been silent all this while, stepped forward. "I trust your judgment, Itachi-sama," he said, his voice laced with subtle reverence. "I will proceed as you have directed." Gaara, the newest member of the Akatsuki, eyed everyone warily. His sand rustled in anticipation, betraying his nervousness. But he didn't voice his fears. He was here to learn, to grow stronger. This was his path, the path he had chosen. He was part of the Akatsuki, and he would follow Itachi's orders without question. Bathed in the silvery glow of the moon, Koushin sat atop the Hokage building. The entire Hidden Leaf village was silent except for the sporadic chirping of insects and the occasional whistle of the wind. He leaned back on his hands, his gaze fixed on the full moon, lost in its tranquil beauty. A soft footfall behind him broke the stillness. Koushin didn't turn, nor did he give any indication that he registered the newcomer. He simply waited for the other to speak. It took a while for the newcomer to break the silence. "Koushin Kami," Itachi uttered softly, his voice echoing faintly in the quiet night. Koushin responded without turning, "I don't have a last name." His voice was steady, a hint of mirth dancing in his words. "It is as if you were expecting me." Itachi's tone was laced with mild surprise. He had assumed that offering Koushin the last name of his parents, a name Koushin had never known, would be a powerful tool to sway him to the Akatsuki's side. But instead, Koushin didn't even bother to look at him. "Oh, it is because I was, Itachi-san," Koushin responded, a grin creeping onto his face as he finally turned to face the Uchiha. However, his gaze remained downwards. Itachi followed his line of sight and his eyes narrowed at what he saw. A seal, previously undetected, was now plainly visible under his foot. Chapter 142, Sowing Discord. "What is this?" Itachi questioned, his intrigue piqued. He was certain the seal wasn't there when he arrived, even though his Sharingan had been active. Koushin's smirk widened as he glanced up at Itachi. "That," he began, his eyes dancing with mischief, "is a seal." Itachi rolled his eyes at the facetious response. He could feel a slight amusement bubbling within him, despite the cryptic nature of their conversation. Koushin was known for his wit and he didn't disappoint. But the Uchiha didn't allow his curiosity to wane, he pressed further. "I gathered as much," he said dryly, "but what is its purpose?" A nonchalant shrug was Koushin's response. "It serves a purpose as significant or as trivial as the one who uses it deems fit." His eyes shone brightly under the moonlight, the teasing glint within them more evident now. "So, if I were to step on it?" Itachi questioned, his gaze moving from Koushin's face to the seal and back again. He knew he was playing into Koushin's game, but he was genuinely curious. Koushin chuckled softly, the sound resonating within the still night. "Well, Itachi-san," he began, a glimmer of excitement flashing across his face. "It's an experiment," Koushin began, an infectious excitement warming his voice. He folded his arms and leaned back, appearing at ease despite the dangerous man standing before him. "I tried to disable Kekkei Genkai altogether, but it seems like I cannot turn off the already activated Sharingan. Would you mind trying Mangekyo, or better yet, the Eternal Mangekyo?" The request fell from Koushin's lips as if it was a casual suggestion, as though he was asking Itachi to demonstrate a new jutsu and not requesting to tamper with one of the most potent eye techniques in existence. For a moment, Itachi was taken aback, eyes widening slightly beneath the slits of his Akatsuki cloak. "You know of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan?" he queried, suspicion lacing his words. Itachi himself had only learned about it from the Uchiha tablet, a knowledge accessible only to those possessing the Sharingan. The further the eye evolved, the more of the tablet's secrets one could unlock. So how did Koushin come by this information? Koushin, however, appeared unfazed by Itachi's evident surprise. "Oh, I know, of course," he said airily, a hint of laughter in his voice. "I had a little chat with Obito-chan, and he told me about it." In reality, Koushin was weaving an intricate lie, but his demeanor was so convincingly casual that even Itachi, a seasoned shinobi well-versed in the art of deception, found himself nodding in acceptance. That would explain it, he mused aloud. The conversation hung in the cool night air for a few moments before Itachi posed another question, his voice quieter this time. "Aren't you curious about your origins, Koushin?" Koushin shook his head, his gaze drifting towards the star-studded sky. "The son of Hana and Hiro Kami," he started, his voice echoing into the silent night. "Killed by Danzo after they were caught attempting to desert the village. Despite being civilians, they were deemed as traitors and were killed with cold blood." As Koushin revealed this, Itachi found himself rooted to the spot in shock, his dark eyes wide as he stared at the younger shinobi. "How do you know all of this?" he demanded, the urgency in his voice barely concealed. Koushin sighed, his shoulders dropping slightly as he continued gazing at the moon. "A kind lady from the route left a letter on my bed, explaining everything about that night when I was 4. Not long after you killed Danzo," he said, turning his gaze back to Itachi. "So, I don't have a reason to hold any resentment towards the village. Thank you, by the way, for avenging my parents. How about you lend me a hand for that gratitude?" Itachi asked, an uncharacteristic edge in his voice. Koushin chuckled, his shoulders shaking lightly with his mirth. "Sorry, I can't do that, Itachi-san," he replied. There was no malice in his voice, but a casualness that suggested he took Itachi's plea lightly. "Why not?" Itachi pressed, his gaze narrowing. "Do you have no reason to hold a grudge against the village?" Koushin's laughter died down as he turned to face Itachi fully. "No, I have no reason to hate the village," he corrected him. "It's a place I call home." A twisted smirk appeared on Itachi's face, an edge of insanity creeping into his features. "But you do! You are nothing but a tool in the hands of a psychopath that uses you to kill others. This whole system is broken, twisted, dark, corrupted." His words were coming out in a fervent rush, his eyes ablaze with the intensity of his convictions. "I have lofty dreams, Koushin-kun, help me achieve them. This village, it took away my family, my lover, my parents, and my brother." Koushin's smile faltered, replaced with a look of contemplation as he gazed at Itachi's Sharingan. "You took away your family, your lover, and your parents. You did this to yourself, Itachi-san." His words were harsh, but there was an undeniable truth to them. Don't put the blame on someone else just because your brother too was killed. You were naive and fool enough to believe in Danzo and the monkey to protect your brother? The last Uchiha, who could bring his clan back. Are you really that stupid? His words seemed to hang in the air between them, a stark contrast to the serene night. Itachi Sharingan spun madly as he glared at Koushin, the rage evident in his eyes. "I think you are too arrogant, Koushin-kun. Not only are you looking directly into my eyes, but you are also disrespecting my beloved brother in front of me. Are you perhaps asking for your death?" Koushin's brow arched slightly at the audacity of Itachi's threat. His lips pursed into a thin line, and he let out a soft chuckle that echoed ominously in the chilly night air. "I think you mistake my observations for arrogance, Itachi-san. The truth can often appear rude when one is too comfortable living a lie." There was a calm certainty in his voice, as if he had all the answers and wasn't threatened by Itachi's power. It was as though he held all the cards and was toying with his opponent, waiting for the right moment to lay them down. "But did you really think I wouldn't be prepared for you?" Koushin continued, his tone steady and unruffled. "After all, you are not the only one who plays in shadows." Chapter 143, See You Around, Itachi-san. Itachi's surprise shifted into a smug grin, and his Sharingan took on the distinct form of the eternal Mangekyo. He pulled a technique from his arsenal that he had borrowed from Shisui and blended with his own Tsukuyomi. "Words may be futile, but loyalty, that's a whole different matter, Koushin-kun," Itachi said, his voice taking on a sinister note. His eyes were ablaze with madness as he locked his gaze onto Koushin. The power of his Jinjutsu washed over him, threatening to seize control. "Perhaps I can make you a loyal soldier yet. You'd make quite an asset." The wicked grin etched on Itachi's face was unsettling. His words hung in the still air like an ominous forewarning, lingering long after they'd been spoken. There was an intensity about him that made the quiet night feel all the more unsettling. Koushin, however, appeared unaffected by Itachi's Jinjutsu. Instead, he met Itachi's gaze head-on, his eyes reflecting the same unflappable resolve. "Well, Itachi-san, if loyalty is all you're after, you've surely picked the wrong person," he retorted, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Don't you know loyalty must be earned, not forced?" His voice was steady, yet it carried a hint of mockery. The thought of falling under Itachi's Jinjutsu seemed almost amusing to him. Itachi's grin faltered, replaced with a scowl. "And you think you can resist my Jinjutsu?" he snapped, his temper flaring. But Koushin was unfazed. He shrugged nonchalantly, tilting his head to one side in an almost patronizing manner. "I guess we'll just have to wait and see, won't we?" Itachi's expression darkened, and he took a threatening step toward Koushin. But Koushin stood his ground, his smirk never leaving his face. "How can this be? Are you immune to Jinjutsu?" Itachi's words were sharp, carrying the disbelief and frustration in his voice. His eyes, darkened with the weight of his eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, bore into Koushin. He was a master of illusions, a puppeteer who had spun threads of control over the strongest of minds, including those in his notorious organization, Akatsuki. Even Obito, with his formidable Sharingan, had succumbed to the enticing promises of Itachi's world of illusion. How then could Koushin, a man without the benefits of such an ocular prowess, stand unaffected? Koushin's lips curved upwards in a dry, almost sardonic smile at the bewildered inquiry. "Seems like you've been keeping to yourself a lot in your little group, Itachi-san," he taunted lightly. "Didn't Orochimaru-san ever tell you? I'm immune to Jinjutsu." He tilted his head slightly, his eyes gleaming with a mischievous light as he added, "I wonder why." Seeing he was able to plant the seed of doubt in Itachi's mind, Koushin let a low chuckle ripple through the quiet night. "Itachi-san," he began, gesturing towards the faintly glowing seal emblazoned on the ground beneath them. "You were wondering what that seal does, right? Well, I lied earlier. It has nothing to do with Kekkei Genkai suppression." Itachi's eyes widened ever so slightly, a rare show of surprise in the typically unflappable shinobi. Koushin could feel the weight of his stare, his gaze searing, palpable. The silence was deafening as Itachi took in this unexpected revelation. "That seal," Koushin continued, his voice laced with an almost eerie calm, "is there to lock the space around us. I've been experimenting on it ever since you arrived. It seems like it works." Itachi said nothing but continued to scrutinize Koushin, his gaze flickering between him and the seal on the ground. The implication of Koushin's words wasn't lost on him. Had he been trapped this whole time, at the mercy of his potential enemy? "I'll cancel it now," Koushin offered, nonchalantly shrugging. "Consider us even after this, Itachi-san. You avenged my parents, and I let you go. Next time we meet, we will be enemies," Koushin declared, his gaze holding a stern warning. There was a flicker of a smile on his lips, but it lacked its usual warmth. The jest was all but gone from his voice, replaced with a serious note that was unusual for the otherwise laid-back shinobi. The seal beneath them faded slowly, the faint glow gradually disappearing into the cool night. In a swirl of smoke, Obito appeared, a look of confusion plastered across his face. His gaze darted between the two men, lingering briefly on the spot where the seal had been moments before. Itachi's eyes never left Koushin's. The intensity of his gaze was only matched by the bewilderment that crept into his usually stoic expression. The atmosphere had turned tense, thick with unsaid words and implications hanging heavy between them. "Are you sure you want to be my enemy?" he finally asked, his voice steady despite the question. Koushin laughed, the sound echoing eerily around them. It was a light, carefree sound, yet there was an undercurrent of caution to it. "Let me ask you the same question, Itachi-san," he retorted, his eyes glinting with a mix of defiance and amusement. "Are you sure you want to make an enemy of me and Konoha?" There was a moment of silence as Itachi processed his words. He wasn't unaware of the risk that Koushin posed, having seen firsthand his immunity to Genjutsu and the unknown seal that Koushin had used. "Konoha has always been my enemy," Itachi finally replied, his voice hard. The somber expression on his face was a stark contrast to his usual dispassionate demeanor. "But you, Koushin. You're a wild card, an unknown variable in a game I've meticulously planned." "I do enjoy a good game," Koushin replied, a wry grin playing on his lips. His eyes sparkled with an untamed light, one that Itachi found both fascinating and infuriating. "But remember, Itachi-san, games are meant to be fun. And there's no fun in a game that's predictable." "I'll take that as a yes, then," Itachi said, a bitter smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. He took a step back, his gaze locked with Koushin's. The challenge was implicit, an unspoken promise of a clash that was sure to come. With that, Itachi turned on his heel, Obito at his side. As they vanished into the night, the eerie silence that had descended was finally broken. "See you around, Itachi-san," Koushin said softly, his eyes on the spot where Itachi and Obito had stood. His words were carried by the night breeze, a quiet farewell to a comrade turned adversary. "Until then, try not to have too much fun without me," he added, a small chuckle escaping his lips. Even in the face of looming conflict, his good humor remained. A smirk played on his lips as he turned away, the weight of the night's events seeming to have little impact on his jovial spirit. Chapter 144, Infiltrating to Aim. The morning that preceded Itachi's fateful visit to Koushin, in the heart of the grim cityscape of Amagakure, a seemingly insignificant scene was about to take place. The city, cloaked in its habitual blanket of rain, breathed a desolate air as it always did. Tucked into a nondescript corner, a bar sat in patient solitude, its emptiness hardly surprising considering the gloom that loomed in the early hours of the day. Tending to the empty bar was an elderly man. His hair, short and as white as fresh snow, stuck out from beneath a weathered hat. A handlebar mustache curled around the corners of his lips, giving his face a distinct gruffness. This was a disguise, of course, for the man was none other than Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin of Konoha. Amidst the silence and stillness of the bar, his eyes flickered with a calculated sharpness, ever vigilant for the potential sources of intel he could gather. The dull creak of the entrance door shattered the silence, causing Jiraiya's eyes to snap up in anticipation. In walked a trio that would have been easily overlooked in a bustling city, yet seemed oddly intriguing against the drab backdrop of Amagakure. The first was a woman, her hair as blue as the waters of a calm sea. Her face was unremarkable, but her eyes carried a spark of tenacity that hinted at a hidden strength. Following her was a man, his hair a vibrant shade of orange, strikingly contrasted against his fair complexion. His face was pretty, a blend of soft lines and gentle features that belied the deadly shinobi he was. But it was the third figure who caught Jiraiya's attention most sharply. The man had hair as dark as the starless Amagakure night, falling like a silky curtain to frame his strikingly pale face. His eyes, the hue of ebony, were devoid of any distinctive marks, their depths revealing nothing of the formidable power that lurked within. He wore a cloak that concealed much of his body, but the aura of calm authority that emanated from him was impossible to miss. Sensing an opportunity, Jiraiya busied himself with cleaning a glass, his gaze flickering discreetly towards the trio. "A bit early for a drink, don't you think?" he quipped, trying to initiate a conversation. The blue-haired woman shot him a disdainful glance, but it was the dark-haired man who responded. His voice was smooth, his words calculated. "We're just seeking shelter from the rain," he said nonchalantly. "Ah," Jiraiya nodded, continuing his pretense of cleaning. "Well, you've picked the right place. Not many people come in this early. You'll have all the peace you need." They settled onto bar stools, the dark-haired man in the center, his companions flanking him. The woman rested her elbows on the bar, leaning forward to run a hand through her damp hair, seemingly unconcerned with the presence of a regular bartender. Meanwhile, the orange-haired man glanced around the bar, taking in the dreary surroundings with an unreadable expression. Conversation flowed naturally between the three, their low voices echoing faintly amidst the silence. They spoke of mundane things, problems at work, and the seemingly ceaseless rain in Amigakure. It all sounded so ordinary, so incredibly normal, that any bystander would be none the wiser of the true significance of their presence. Observing them from behind the bar, Jiraiya found himself drawn into their conversation. Pouring their drinks with practiced ease, he decided to subtly probe, driven by an innate curiosity. "You folks seem to work around the clock," he said casually, sliding a glass towards the woman. "Sounds tough." The woman shrugged, her eyes flickering towards him before focusing on her drink. "It's what we do," she replied. "I've always dreamed of becoming a shinobi," Jiraiya confessed, leaning against the counter and adopting a wistful expression. "The idea of being able to protect your village, to carry such responsibility, it's fascinating." The orange-haired man chuckled softly, turning to face Jiraiya. "It's not all glory and honor, you know," he commented. "There's a lot of pain involved. A lot of sacrifices. And a lot of treachery," the woman added, her voice colder now. Jiraiya's eyes flickered between the two of them, noting the subtle changes in their demeanor. "Treachery," he echoed. "Sounds like you've had a run-in with some less than honorable types." The dark-haired man remained silent throughout, his gaze locked onto the drink in his hand. But at Jiraiya's words, he looked up, meeting the older man's gaze with a calm, unreadable expression. "In this line of work, treachery is almost inevitable," he said, his voice smooth and even. "Sometimes, those we admire and respect are the ones who betray us." Jiraiya nodded, his face a mask of understanding. He poured himself a drink, his gaze drifting towards the rain outside. "Like Hanzo, huh?" The air stilled as Jiraiya uttered the name, Hanzo. The tension in the room instantly escalated. Both the orange-haired man and the blue-haired woman stiffened, their body language betraying their surprise. Despite their intense reactions, they remained seated, held in check by the familiarity of their companion. Jiraiya, who had been observing them closely, could not help but grimace. He had indeed stepped over the line, and the atmosphere in the room attested to it. Quick as a flash, Jiraiya performed a series of hand signs. Almost immediately, the bar started to change. The walls, the door, the windows, everything around them morphed until they were encased in the fleshy, confining stomach of a giant frog. Jiraiya chuckled, his eyes glinting with an odd mixture of amusement and regret. "Well, sorry to force you into this," he said, his voice echoing ominously in the bizarre enclosure, "but seems like I have blown my cover. Hanzo, what happened to him?" "The last I heard, he was the Kage." His words hung heavy in the air, each syllable loaded with the trepidation of unspoken secrets. Then, breaking the silence, the dark-haired man spoke, his voice as calm as a placid lake, "Hanzo is dead." The words struck Jiraiya like a lightning bolt. His eyes widened in disbelief, and he gasped, "That is impossible. He is known as a demigod. Who can beat him? Especially without the world knowing it." With a haughty scoff, the blue-haired woman retorted, "Just because you lost to him doesn't mean he is unbeatable, Jiraiya." He chuckled wryly, his eyebrows furrowed in disbelief. "Seems like my disguise wasn't good enough." The orange-haired man finally spoke, his voice soft yet brimming with conviction. Like we said, Jiraiya, the shinobi world is filled with treachery. People who desert their students, godsons, friends, and masters. You must know, you did them all. The joviality in Jiraiya's eyes flickered and died, replaced by a grim determination. His smile vanished, his face hardened, and his posture stiffened. His voice, when it came, was laced with anger and disbelief. The hell are you talking about? The dark-haired man spoke then, his words piercing the thick tension in the room. Where were you when Yondaime Hokage was killed? You knew about the weak seal and how they were cautious. Where were you during Naruto's growth? You deserted your godson. Where were you when Tsukumo was driven to suicide? And where were you when the child of prophecy you thought was about to be killed and was forced to watch his friend murdered in front of his eyes? Oh right, chasing your lover, Orochimaru. Chapter 145, Welcome to Akatsuki. Jiraiya was stunned into silence. He could only stare at them, his face paling considerably, his eyes wide and full of disbelief. Finally, he managed to ask, his voice barely more than a whisper, "Who the hell are you?" Without uttering a word, the trio dropped their disguises. The one with hair as black as the Amigakure night revealed eyes that glowed with the power of the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan. The orange-haired man, his face now bearing a striking resemblance to Yahiko, revealed eyes adorned with the Rinnegan and a face studded with piercings. The blue-haired woman didn't change much physically, but her eyes held a new intensity, a steeliness that was not there before. "Hello, Jiraiya-sensei," the woman greeted, her voice as calm as the surface of a still pond, her face adorned with a faint smile. Jiraiya could only stare, shock and disbelief warring in his eyes. He looked at each of them, his mind struggling to comprehend the revelation. This was not what he had expected, not by a long shot. The implications of their true identities were too profound to fully grasp at the moment. "Conan, are you?" "Conan?" Jiraiya's voice wavered, the familiarity of the woman's face causing his heart to pound uncomfortably in his chest. For a moment, there was silence. Then Conan simply nodded, her steel blue gaze never leaving his. A cold chill swept through Jiraiya. His gaze shifted to the orange-haired man whose face bore the striking resemblance of Yahiko, yet his eyes were not Yahiko's. They were the eyes of the boy he had trained, the boy who was supposed to be the prophesied savior, the eyes of Nagato. "Those eyes, how can you have them?" His voice wavered, his mind struggling to reconcile the face of his dead student with the eyes of the child of prophecy. Jiraiya turned his gaze to the dark-haired man, his mind churning with questions. He looked at the face that was as familiar as it was unnerving. The Uchiha insignia on his collar was unmistakable. Itachi Uchiha, the prodigy of the Uchiha clan who had massacred his own family and joined Akatsuki. "Caught a big fish, haven't I?" Jiraiya attempted to inject some levity into the tension-soaked atmosphere, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The dark-haired man didn't seem affected by the attempt at humor. His deep-set eyes, glowing with the power of the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan, bore into Jiraiya with an intensity that made him flinch. It was as if those eyes were peering straight into his soul, making him feel strangely exposed. His ominous eyes were jarring him. "Wrong, Jiraiya," he said softly. "We caught you." His words hung in the air, a damning verdict echoing ominously within the confines of the giant frog's stomach. As his pupils began to rotate, he added, "From now on, you are the enemy of Konoha. Welcome to Akatsuki." Jiraiya froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The finality in the man's voice was chilling. His pupils danced with an unnerving hypnotic rhythm, and Jiraiya could feel his resolve beginning to crumble. The reality of his situation slowly sank in, he was now a prisoner. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. The roaring in his ears drowned out everything else. His knees buckled under the weight of his defeat, and he fell to the ground. His gaze was locked onto the man's eyes, consumed by the swirling pattern of his Sharingan. Tears welled in his eyes as he felt the last remnants of his resolve crumble away. Everything he had believed in, everything he had fought for, seemed to be slipping through his fingers. He felt like he was falling into an endless abyss, with nothing to anchor him to reality. His heart ached with an indescribable pain as he realized the full extent of his failure. Caught a big fish, haven't I? Jiraiya attempted to inject some levity into the tension-soaked atmosphere, his hands balling into fists at his sides. The dark-haired man didn't seem affected by the attempt at humor. His deep-set eyes, glowing with the power of the eternal Manjikyu Sharingan, bore into Jiraiya with an intensity that made him flinch. It was as if those eyes were peering straight into his soul, making him feel strangely exposed. His ominous eyes were jarring him. "Wrong, Jiraiya," he said softly. "We caught you." His words hung in the air, a damning verdict echoing ominously within the confines of the giant frog's stomach. As his pupils began to rotate, he added, "From now on, you are the enemy of Konoha. Welcome to Akatsuki." Jiraiya froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The finality in the man's voice was chilling. His pupils danced with an unnerving hypnotic rhythm, and Jiraiya could feel his resolve beginning to crumble. The reality of his situation slowly sank in. He was now a prisoner. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. The roaring in his ears drowned out everything else. His knees buckled under the weight of his defeat, and he fell to the ground. His gaze was locked onto the man's eyes, consumed by the swirling pattern of his Sharingan. Tears welled in his eyes as he felt the last remnants of his resolve crumble away. Everything he had believed in, everything he had fought for, seemed to be slipping through his fingers. He felt like he was falling into an endless abyss, with nothing to anchor him to reality. His heart ached with an indescribable pain as he realized the full extent of his failure. With Itachi's power, in an instant, Jiraiya's world shifted. The red-hued gaze of the Manjikyu Sharingan melted into his mind, consuming his thoughts, bending and warping them until they no longer resembled his own. It wasn't just mind control. It wasn't an illusion or a simple trick of the light. It was as if his very essence was being rewritten, his loyalties redefined, and his beliefs realigned. He felt his heart twist, contracting with a raw, acute pain before a soothing warmth rushed to fill the void. A new sense of loyalty, unyielding and unwavering, began to grow inside him, rooted deep within his heart. It was a loyalty that transcended any he'd felt before, anchoring itself into the depths of his soul, infallible and indomitable. All of it pointed in one direction, towards one person, Itachi. The echoing words resounded again, "Welcome to Akatsuki." Akatsuki, the word rolled around in his mind, taking on a new, profound meaning. It was no longer a threat to the peace he had fought so desperately to maintain, but a beacon of hope, a new cause worth fighting for. A strange calmness took over Jiraiya, washing away the tension in his muscles. He slowly got to his feet, his gaze never leaving Itachi's. He felt a strong sense of purpose, an indomitable resolve that couldn't be shaken by any force. He had found a new path, and he would follow it to the end, irrespective of where it led him. "You're right," Jiraiya found himself saying. His voice was surprisingly steady, stripped of its previous tremors of fear and desperation. "I've been caught, and I surrender." The words felt right, the surrender not a defeat, but an acceptance of a path that, in this inexplicable twist, seemed like the one he had been searching for all along. A path led by Itachi. There was a silence. The air between them charged with anticipation, as if waiting for a verdict. Then Itachi spoke, his voice steady, echoing the calmness Jiraiya now felt. "Then rise, Jiraiya of the Akatsuki." The words resonated with Jiraiya, filling him with a sense of purpose, of belonging. He stood up straight, his back no longer stooped, his shoulders squared. His eyes, once filled with despair and shock, now held a firm resolve. He looked at Itachi, his leader, his gaze steady. "Lead the way, Itachi-sama," Jiraiya said, and there was no trace of his old self in that voice. No trace of the man who fought for the leaf, who defended the Hokage, who raised Naruto. He was Jiraiya of the Akatsuki now, a new identity born from the ashes of the old. The echo of his words faded, absorbed into the fleshy walls of the giant frog's stomach. There was a sense of finality to it all, the chapter of his past life closed, and a new one beginning. Just like that, under the watchful gaze of Itachi's Manjikyu Sharingan, Jiraiya turned, fully embracing his new role, his new allegiance. The Leaf's loss was Akatsuki's gain, and Konoha's once gallant toad sage was now one of them. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 6.